In February 1959, a group of 9 Soviet tourists went missing in the mountains of the northern Urals. 2 weeks later, their bodies were found at the base of Mount Oturtun, which in the language of the indigenous people meant the Mountain of the Dead. The place was named after the leader of the expedition, the Dyatlov Pass. Many years later, American student Holly King became so interested in this case that she decided to gather a new group and go to this mysterious place. The catalyst was a film about an expedition by American scientists who tried to solve the mystery of the Dyatlov group's death but achieved no success. Holly's professor suggested she take up this case for her psychology project, and she invited her friend Jensen to work on it as a film director. They applied for and won a grant. The professor mentioned that she first learned about these events from a novella by Soviet journalist Yarovoy, who soon died in a car accident after the book's release. Jensen suspected that this was how the authorities tried to cover up something terrible. And although people now know a lot about the events of those years, the complete picture remains a mystery. The most common explanation is hypothermic dementia. Although this can happen to those exposed to freezing, in this case, all 9 experienced tourists started undressing at the same time, which is simply impossible. Another frequent explanation is an avalanche. But if they heard the avalanche, why did they sit near the camp for 3 hours without shoes? So there are many answers to this question, one of which involves the secrets of the Russian military, making it seem that the truth will never be known. The first stage of the journey is a flight from Oregon to Chelyabinsk, from where the group will head to the Mountain of the Dead, named by the Mansi people due to a series of unexplained deaths and mysterious disappearances. So the expedition included sound engineer Denise, climber Andy, president of the Northwest Pathfinders Association, who has conquered all the steep peaks in the USA, and his friend Hauser, who spent a whole year conquering the Himalayas. After gathering the group, the guys began to prepare, buying rations, studying maps, and training in the mountains. On January 25th, the team set off. Sometime later, news broke across all U.S. TV channels about the disappearance of 5 Oregon students in the Ural Mountains. Rescuers managed to find their belongings, tents, backpacks, and other equipment. A Russian TV correspondent reported details about the more than strange disappearance of the group of American documentarians, although experts are constructing their versions of the reasons for the disappearance. In winter, the temperature here can drop to -50 degrees, with strong, piercing winds, whose direction constantly changes. This means that if a person walks against the wind and thinks they are walking straight, they might actually be walking in circles. There are speculations about the intervention of some extraterrestrial devices, which many witnesses saw in these places, or even about the appearance of the Yeti. The Mansi elders recall rumbling and fiery balls over these mountains on the days when the Dyatlov group disappeared. They consider these places a portal to the other world. The students wanted to repeat the infamous Dyatlov expedition, and it seems they succeeded. Rescuers managed to find a camera that captured the last days of the documentarians' lives. A group of hackers posted frames on their portal, showing Holly talking about the darkness that followed her from the open door, while Jensen calms the girl, although she is sure they will not get out of this place. The action shifts to a month earlier, when lively and cheerful students are traveling to the Urals. On the train, they are having fun, hoping for success and worldwide fame. Andy is proud of his acquisition, a phone with GPS, which will help them navigate the mountains, while Holly conducts tests to find out people's desire to hike. Soon the group arrives in the town of Evdel, where they plan to interview the only surviving member of the Dyatlov expedition, who left the route due to illness, but now he is held in a psychiatric hospital. However, doctors do not allow the Americans inside, and they only manage to see the old man showing them a note saying, "Leave." In the evening, the group goes to a local bar. The bartender pours them local moonshine and says that the Dyatlov group stopped here in 1959 and drank the same thing as the Americans. There, they meet Sergei, who speaks English and drives them to the village of Vizsa, the last point before heading out on the road. The man tells them that his aunt, an English teacher, participated in the search for the Dyatlov group. She claims that in 1959, not 9 but 11 bodies were found near the Mountain of the Dead. Next to the last 2, which looked very different from the others, lay some unknown device. But none of this was mentioned in the reports. After the conversation, the guys set off on foot. At night they stop and set up camp, as the weather begins to change. Hauser prepares a camp dinner, and the guys have fun joking with each other. At night, people see strange lights in the sky and recall reports of orange flashes over the Dyatlov camp, but they decide they still won't be able to solve this mystery and go to sleep. However, in the morning, they noticed numerous barefoot tracks of unusual sizes around the tents, resembling human ones. The main thing is that the tracks have no beginning or end, as if some creatures did not come to the camp but flew in. Nevertheless, they set off to explore the area. Soon the students find an abandoned meteorological station, around which the same tracks are found. And in the station's booth lies a torn-out human tongue. Denise panics and asks Holly to leave. But Jensen tells her about a pass in China where animals and birds crash into cliffs and people go insane and die. It is said to happen because of the sound of the wind. Holly admits that she had a similar dream. Mountains, snow, and some door with darkness behind it. And then she heard about the Dyatlov Pass and realized that she would find out everything here. During their conversation, the camera captures two human figures running far in the background. Later they go further and unexpectedly come to the Dyatlov Pass. Once, 9 people set up camp in this very place, had dinner, and went to sleep. But somewhere between 9 and 11 at night, something that the authorities called an unknown irresistible force forced them to leave the tent in such horror that they cut it from the inside and ran into the night, where it was minus 28 degrees. Holly marks the places where their bodies were found. The first deceased, Rustem Slobodin, Igor Dyatlov, the group's leader and the most experienced tourist. It was probably his idea to leave the tent. Zinaida Kolmogorova was closest to the camp, the only victim who resisted, as her tongue and most of her oral cavity were torn out. Lyudmila Dubinina, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, Alexander Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov. The cause of death for all was called hypothermia, but Rustem and Nikolai had serious skull injuries, and Lyudmila and Alexander had broken ribs, which was not observed in others. There were no signs of an attack on any of the bodies, no external injuries. Something broke the skulls of 2 men and the ribs of 2 people without leaving even bruises. Moreover, Alexander's body had a high level of radiation. But from where, and why only on him? Georgy Krivonashenko and Yuri Doroshenko, when others ran away, sat by the extinguished fire and froze to death. While Holly is conducting research, Andy is surprised that their group somehow covered 22 kilometers in one day. Everyone's watches, GPS, and even the compass stopped working. Some guys suggest leaving the mountains before it's too late, but Holly persuades them to stay and finish the film. At night, Holly notices that the Geiger counter starts signaling, and together with Jensen, they go up the slope, where they find a high but not deadly level of radiation. Unexpectedly, the students discover the entrance to a bunker, closed with an iron door. Holly wants to open it, although Jensen is categorically against it, as Russian authorities did not build it here for nothing, closing something dangerous in the mountain. However, it turns out that the door is open and just a bit frozen. Holly asks Jensen not to tell the others about the discovery to avoid causing panic among the already scared team. They return to the camp and settle for the night. Around 6 a.m., a huge avalanche roars down the mountains, killing Denise, injuring Andy, and sweeping away the tents and almost all supplies. At first, everyone quarrels, trying to find the culprit of the tragedy, but gradually they realize it was an attempt on their expedition. They help Andy and try to contact the outside world somehow. Holly tells them about the bunker, which enrages Hauser since they are freezing here in the snow, while it might be warm there. The students launch a signal flare and wait for help. After some time, 2 people arrive, claiming they saw the flare, but Andy does not believe them, since they have no backpacks and could not have reached here so quickly. He stays to hold them back while the others are ordered to run. The strangers shoot Andy and wound Hauser. Holly, Jensen, and the wounded Hauser barely manage to get into the bunker. The strangers pursue them, but the students close the door. The Americans turn on the lighting, although it is dim and flickering. Running through the tunnels, they find a laboratory full of various devices and documents, among which are old journals with the names of people who died in the line of duty. There are also details about the famous American experiment with the teleportation of the USS Eldridge. Hauser feels unwell and stays put, as Holly promises to find an exit in return for him. The students continue on alone. Soon, Holly and Jensen find the bodies of soldiers who recently died. One of them is missing a tongue, presumably the one they found earlier at the station. But the other bodies are very old and even skeletonized. The 2 open another door, behind which they sense movement. Suddenly, under the flashlight, they see exactly the same camera they have. Moreover, it has their recordings on it. Jensen recalls the teleportation of the Eldridge, which likely happened to them too. At that time, many soldiers mutated, turning into something incomprehensible. At that moment they hear Hauser's screams and rush to him, finding their friend being torn apart by two humanoid mutants. Noticing the newcomers, the mutants attack them. Resembling skeletons covered in skin, the mutants seem to possess the ability to teleport as they appear out of nowhere in any place. Jensen and Holly leave their friend's body, run out of the bunker, and close the door. To their surprise, the mutants do not chase after them. The survivors turn around, and instead of a snowy field, they see a fossil forming a huge round tunnel. The students realize that this is the path for the mutants' teleportation. Holly throws debris inside and sees that the passage is activated. Looking around, the couple finds drawings on the walls made by the local inhabitants and understands that they discovered this place, built by an ancient civilization once living under these mountains. Such portals can be anything, even weapons scattered around the world, which explains many great mysteries. They do not know where it might take them, to which space or time, but Jensen suggests they need to mentally focus on the place they intend to go. And it will work. The only place that they both clearly imagine is the surroundings of their camp near the bunker entrance. They have no choice but to head into the tunnel. The plot shifts back to 1959, when a Soviet girl from the search team finds their bodies and is very surprised because the rescuers have already found all 9 participants of the expedition. Approaching Soviet soldiers take the bodies to the bunker, while one major picks up the Americans' camera, not understanding what it is. The soldier wants to place the Americans with the other bodies, but the major orders them to be placed in a separate room for examination by a doctor. Undressing the deceased, the soldiers are astonished by the unusual clothing for the 1950s. The naked bodies of Holly and Jensen, now looking like mutant bodies, are hung on hooks in a separate cell. The sergeant places the camera under a light. When everyone leaves, the creatures begin to revive. The man lifts his head and looks at the woman. She directs her gaze at the camera, and an angel wing tattoo is visible on the right side of her neck, the same one Holly had. Despite some inconsistencies, the storyline adheres to most known facts, although the American-Russian creative team skillfully handled the mystified legacy of the USSR. However, the found footage effect combined with acting, special effects, and magnificent locations is good enough to ensure the thriller's watchability. The story is set in a world grappling with a unique and terrifying epidemic. This epidemic, which has baffled scientists and experts for over 8 years, is spread through language and speech, making communication dangerous. The main symptom of the disease begins with a high fever, eventually causing the afflicted to speak incoherently, descending into madness. As a precaution, people have resorted to wearing headsets constantly, as the disease can be transmitted by hearing the speech of the infected. Those affected by the illness, known as jabbers, are swiftly quarantined and forcibly separated from their families, leading to public outrage and distress. The story introduces Murat, a linguist whose life has been profoundly altered by the pandemic. Isolated and lonely, he lives with his mother in an apartment, his life reduced to a series of cautious routines. Each day, Murat meticulously checks his temperature, a ritual that underscores the constant fear of infection. One day, Murat's attention is drawn to Sul, a young woman immersed in a book at a bus stop. Time seems to stand still as Murat is captivated by her presence. However, the moment is broken when she notices his prolonged gaze. Realizing he's been staring, Murat awkwardly shouts that no bus is coming and quickly departs, heading back home. The narrative continues as Murat, despite his reluctance, leaves his home to buy soap for his mother. While at the supermarket, he encounters an old woman who suddenly turns around and speaks incoherently, a clear sign of being a jabber. An alarm is triggered, announcing the presence of a jabber and urging people to evacuate immediately. In the ensuing chaos, everyone flees, except for the old woman and a young boy who is left behind without a headset. Murat witnesses the boy's mother crying outside. Driven by a sense of responsibility, Murat bravely re-enters the supermarket, gives his headset to the boy, and makes a narrow escape. Remarkably, Murat manages to avoid contracting the epidemic. Despite his close encounter with the jabber, he experiences a high fever but eventually recovers and returns home unscathed, soap in hand. Meanwhile, Anton, a high-ranking official at AEI, is desperately seeking a solution to the pandemic. He faces a setback upon learning that even young children are susceptible to the disease. However, his interest is piqued when he hears about Murat's incident at the supermarket. Intrigued by the possibility that Murat might be immune, Anton delves into surveillance footage to learn more. He observes Murat collapsing in the supermarket, but later continuing on as if unharmed, which deepens Anton's confusion and curiosity. In another part of the city, Murat visits the home of his mother's friend, responding to a desperate call for help. The friend's son, Arif's father, is exhibiting symptoms of the disease, speaking disconnectedly. Arif, holding on to hope, pleads with Murat to find a cure, believing in Murat's unique abilities. He even suggests collaborating with Murat's friend Ozgur, but Murat informs him that Ozgur has passed away. Arif, skeptical about Ozgur's death due to the lack of a proper funeral and the absence of his body, plans to meet with Errol, a businessman known for trading in information. Arif hopes Errol can shed light on whether Ozgur is indeed alive and assist in their quest for a cure. Meanwhile, Anton takes a deep dive into investigating the mysterious case of the headset left with a child at the supermarket. He discovers that the headset belongs to Murat, a linguist who was working on the pandemic case but vanished after a disastrous fire that claimed the lives of his team. Intrigued, Anton intensifies his investigation. Delving further, Anton uncovers records of Murat visiting the emergency room with severe fever more than 12 times. Using video footage from the supermarket, along with a temperature detector, Anton confirms his suspicions. Murat is immune to the pandemic. He deduces this from the fact that Murat has surpassed the critical threshold of 4 high fever encounters, a significant discovery given Murat's 12 instances. In the meantime, Murat, spurred by Arif's belief in Ozgur's survival, decides to investigate further. He meets a businessman who offers them access to AEI's resources, allowing them to gather information independently and save costs. With newfound determination, Murat boldly infiltrates the AEI headquarters and navigates his way to the information hub downstairs. There, Murat searches for Ozgur's name and is initially disheartened to find records indicating his death. He clicks on the autopsy image, expecting the worst, but is surprised to see an unrecognizable burnt face with no identifiable tattoo on the wrist. This absence of a tattoo, which Murat knows his friend had, rekindles his hope that Ozgur might still be alive. Before leaving the hub room, Murat impulsively searches for his own name in the database. To his shock and dismay, he discovers video footage of himself from the supermarket incident. Realizing the potential danger of this discovery, Murat hastily exits the room, unable to delete the record. His escape is filled with anxiety and urgency, knowing that his presence in the AEI database could have unforeseen and dangerous consequences. Soon after, Anton, fueled by his significant discovery regarding Murat's immunity to the pandemic, eagerly approaches his superior to share his findings. However, his excitement quickly turns to frustration when his superior dismisses his claims, cautioning against spreading unverified rumors. Frustrated by this response and determined to pursue the matter further, Anton decides to take matters into his own hands. He acquires the address of Murat and his mother's home, although under a false name, and sets out with his men to capture Murat. Upon arriving at the destination, they find Murat's mother answering the door, mistakenly assuming it might be her son. However, the AEI forces swiftly invade the home, scattering throughout the house and the apartment complex. They strategically position themselves, lying in wait for Murat's return to spring their trap. Unnoticed by the AEI operatives, Murat's mother subtly places a prearranged signal on the window, a discreet method of communication between her and her son. She then calmly lights a cigarette and sits down, maintaining an air of composure despite the tense situation. Meanwhile, Murat, who had been waiting for another glimpse of the beautiful girl he had seen at the bus stop, returns home. As he approaches his apartment, he notices the signal from his mother. Realizing the imminent danger, he hesitates at the entrance. Inside, Outside, Anton and his team are eagerly anticipating Murat's arrival, ready to execute their well-laid plans. In a moment of inner conflict, Murat grapples with the decision to enter the apartment. His thoughts drift to the beautiful girl, and the realization dawns on him that if he walks into the trap, he might never see her again. This thought acts as a turning point, and in his swift decision, Murat chooses to flee in the opposite direction, much to Anton's dismay. His abrupt departure catches Anton and his men off guard, and they lose track of him in mere seconds. Back at Murat's house, Anton seizes the opportunity to collect Murat's belongings for further investigation, hoping to get more insight into Murat's unique situation. The next morning, as Murat sets out on his search for Ozgur, he is stopped by AEI forces demanding to see his ID. In a moment of tension, as Murat nervously reaches for his ID, a bomb suddenly explodes nearby, causing the AEI forces to scatter and leaving Murat unattended. Seizing the moment, Murat heads to a location where he believes he might find Ozgur. However, his hopes are dashed when he discovers Ozgur is not there. Speaking with the man who made Ozgur's distinctive tattoo, Murat learns that since Ozgur's death, others have been imitating the tattoo, diminishing his chances of finding Ozgur. Meanwhile, Anton meticulously reviews tape recordings overnight and stumbles upon a recording of Murat claiming that he is incapable of jabbering, even if he wanted to. This revelation prompts Anton to rush to AEI to share his findings with a colleague. However, upon his arrival, Anton is informed that his boss Fazil is waiting for him. In a confrontational meeting, Fazil sternly instructs him to withdraw from the case. During this time, Murat finds comfort in a conversation with an old man who offers him a drink. As they share this moment, the old man tries to alleviate Murat's guilt over his wife's tragic death, which occurred after she was affected by the pandemic. He reassures Murat that it wasn't his fault. Murat listens in silence, eventually sharing his plans to venture into Zone 6 in his relentless search for Ozgur. Soon, Murat seeks the help of Errol, a man introduced to him by Arif. Errol is known for his willingness to do anything for money, and Murat needs him to create a false ID. They arrange to meet the following day. Afterward, Murat visits Arif's house, where he expresses his determination to find Ozgur and their shared goal of discovering a cure for the epidemic. Before he leaves, Arif's grandmother generously gives him some money, while his mother, having no cash, gives him her necklace as a token of support. However, their movements do not go unnoticed. One of Anton's men spots Murat and promptly informs Anton, who instructs his team to tail him discreetly. The next day, Murat meets Errol, as planned, to collect his forged ID. Just as they complete the transaction, Errol receives an alert that AEI forces are closing in on their location. In a frantic rush, they escape, successfully evading Anton and his team, who later search the warehouse to no avail. With his new fake ID in hand, Murat heads to the subway station, bound for the less monitored Zone 6. He smoothly passes the initial security checkpoint using the fake ID. However, his sense of safety is short-lived, as a security guard becomes suspicious upon recognizing Murat's face from wanted posters in the subway. In a coincidental twist, Sul, who Murat has been longing to see again, suddenly appears in front of him. To his astonishment and delight, she kisses him right there in the subway, creating a moment of confusion for the pursuing security guard. This unexpected encounter leaves Murat feeling ecstatic. Holding hands, they continue their journey on the subway, embarking on a path filled with uncertainty, yet united in their unexpected connection. Murat and Sul, having left the bus stop, navigate through menacing people and areas until they find a secluded rooftop where they can talk privately. On the rooftop, Murat, preoccupied with his quest to find Ozgur, is about to leave when Sul insists he stay for a meal. During their conversation, he learns her name and he expresses gratitude for her assistance earlier. Sul then reveals her true intentions. She had been following Murat purposefully, hoping to recruit him into her team, P1, which is dedicated to finding a cure for the pandemic. Surprised by this revelation, Murat abruptly leaves, not allowing her to finish explaining. Later, Murat returns to the home he shares with his wife, where he is flooded with memories as he wanders through each room. That night, he dreams of himself torn between his wife and Sul, symbolizing his internal conflict. The next morning, Murat's search for Ozgur takes an unexpected turn when he is kidnapped by masked individuals who question his identity and affiliation with the AEI. At this critical moment, Sul intervenes, assuring them that Murat is not with the AEI and is on a personal mission. Murat convinces them of his intentions, and they agree to share information if they cross paths with Ozgur. Sewell then brings Murat to his studio where she works, and after apologizing for the earlier misunderstanding, she hosts a podcast. In the broadcast, she discusses the AEI's cruel practices, relating them to the unjust death of her boyfriend, and concludes by emphasizing the importance of finding a cure to end the crisis. Meanwhile, Anton retreats to his house, where his wife and son are quarantined in the basement due to the pandemic. While there, Anton senses he is being watched. Upon investigating, he finds no one, unaware that Fazil's right-hand agent is covertly observing him from a hiding spot. Somewhere else, Murat and Sewell's journey through the pandemic-stricken streets of the city continues. While walking downtown, Murat demonstrates his unusual resistance to the pandemic by briefly removing his headset near Jabber's, showcasing how his skull heats up without experiencing the usual symptoms. This unique ability intrigues Sewell, who sees potential in Murat's immunity. That night, Murat stays at the studio with Sewell, and upon waking up the next morning, he finds himself surrounded by the team Sewell had mentioned. The team members introduce themselves and request Murat's assistance. Initially hesitant, Murat warms up to the idea when Sewell assures him that joining the team could aid in his quest to find Ozgur. As part of their ongoing search for Ozgur, Murat and Sewell come across a hotel displaying the symbol that Murat associates with Ozgur. They decide to investigate by entering the hotel and seeking an audience with the hotel's boss. However, their encounter quickly turns dangerous. In a moment of quick thinking, Murat leverages his past experience and knowledge of recording voices to offer the boss a rare tape. This move impresses the boss, diffusing the tension and earning them a chance to sit and talk. As Murat and Sewell are about to explain their quest for Ozgur, their conversation is interrupted by a lady entering the room to deliver an item and collect payment. After she leaves, the boss encourages them to continue. Murat and Sewell reveal their search for the person associated with the symbol they possess. To their surprise, the boss informs them that the lady who just left was the one who brought the symbol to the hotel. Reacting quickly, Murat and Sewell rush outside to catch the lady, but they are too late. She drives away, showing no interest in engaging with them. This missed opportunity leaves Murat and Sewell with more questions than answers as they continue their journey in the uncertain and dangerous world. My friends, the continuation of the story is now on the screen in front of you. Sunny Atlanta. The 13th day of quarantine in the city is on the brink of extinction. Panic and horror surround those who have managed to survive. No one understands how it will all end, but how did it all begin? 2 weeks before the current events. An ordinary day in Atlanta does not portend anything unusual. The city is bustling with life. Elementary school teacher, Caddy Frank, brings her students on a field trip to the local hospital. At the same time, on one of the floors of the clinic, Dr. Sanders finds herself in quarantine due to an unknown illness. The woman remembers that shortly before the first symptoms appeared, she had contact with a patient from Syria who was sick. In another part of the city, Jenna also feels unwell, but not because of the virus. She is anxious about moving in with her boyfriend Alex. At the last moment, Jenna backs out and confesses to a cop that she is not ready to rush. Alex is unable to sort things out with his girlfriend because he is called to the department. There, a major meeting is being planned, where the police are asked to prepare for a difficult situation in the city. There is a suspicion that the Syrian brought an unknown virus to Atlanta, and quarantine may need to be declared. Dr. Sabina Lomers speaks to the police officers. She also talks about the threat of an epidemic, but assures the audience that nothing serious is happening. Another main character who will face difficult trials is Teresa. The pregnant woman visits her mother's shop, where her mother reminds her that she is expected at the adoption agency, which is looking for parents for her daughter. The reminder upsets Teresa, but her boyfriend reassures her and assures her that he has everything under control. They will run away tonight, and no one will be able to take their child. Caddy's students perform for the patients, but the teacher is concerned about why Dr. Sanders did not meet them. The doctor on duty pretends not to know about the colleague's fate and does not tell the teacher about the infected doctor's condition. Caddy begins to suspect something strange is happening soon. When they were about to leave, the doctors announce that the children will have to stay a little longer. The hospital is under quarantine and everyone must undergo a thorough check. Dr. Lorms arranges a secret meeting with Alex and asks him to take the situation under personal control. She admits that she has extensive experience but has never encountered such a virus before. According to the expert, the danger threatens not only Atlanta but the entire world. On-call officers are sent to the zero patients home, from where the doctors believe the epidemic began. Cops protect themselves as much as possible with shields and gloves and convince the patients' relatives that they should also take safety measures. The boy is in serious condition and is taken to the hospital despite his attempt to escape. Caddy realizes that her son and his friend Thomas have run away. The teacher goes in search of the boys just as the zero patient is being brought in. The woman notices the patient but refuses to leave the corridor until her students are found. Officer Jake Riley volunteers to help Caddy. Together they search for the missing boys, and the pair witnesses an even more terrifying sight: the bodies of Dr. Sanders and her fiancé. Fresh news reports indicate that the situation has worsened. The zero patient died after a severe period. The cops also learn about what happened to Dr. Sanders. But more frightening to the police is the fact that all the emigrants' relatives were also infected. This means the virus spreads very quickly and kills the host within 48 hours. Caddy finds the boys in a rat lab. It seems the danger is over, but the doctor informs her that the quarantine is extended for 2 days and no one will be able to leave the hospital earlier. During the report, Dr. Connor informs the police that they have identified the virus. He assures them that traces of the pathogen were found in the zero patient's personal belongings, and it all looks like an attempt to deliberately cause an infection. Teresa arrives at the train station to leave for her boyfriend's relatives, but unexpectedly, the train refuses to take new passengers and passes by. Upon learning that Jake is locked in the hospital, Alex directly asks Dr. Lorms about what is happening. The expert admits that a border is being established around the area that cannot be crossed for several days. By evening, panic begins in the city. People are surrounded by an iron fence, and many find themselves separated from their loved ones. Teresa learns that she and Xander are also on opposite sides of the cordon, and the girl will have to decide what to do next. Despite the measures taken, the number of infected continues to grow. At night, experts conduct an autopsy on the zero patient and discover that the virus affects all vital organs. Furthermore, there is evidence that it takes only 48 hours from infection to the end. There is no chance of recovery, and if a vaccine is not found soon, the world faces serious trouble. Alex manages to contact Jenna and asks her to stay in a safe place. The girl decides to lock herself in her office. Returning to her mother's shop, Teresa calls Xander and tells him that she is okay. Despite this, the boy promises to find a way and get to her through the dangerous fence. Jenna is joined by her colleagues who did not manage to leave the city. Meanwhile, the girl's fiancé receives a warning that he should not break the rules due to personal attachments. Jake is asked to help the doctors sort through the belongings of the sick to find their relatives. Examining the zero patient's mobile phone, the guy notices a frightening detail. A day before his death, the young man communicated with a blonde woman who had not been known about before. Jake immediately reports his findings to his colleagues, and the department decides to send a squad to search for the stranger. The police find the blonde's address, but her parents say she has not been seen since yesterday. Another emergency meeting is called, and everyone is ordered to find the girl within hours. While waiting for the doctor, Caddy listens to a news broadcast talking about the zero patient and the doctors who contracted the virus from him. For the first time, the woman notices discrepancies, but her thoughts are interrupted by Dr. Connor, who assures the teacher that everything will end soon and she and the children will be able to go home. Leaving, Caddy still decides to ask about her suspicions. She was surprised that Dr. Sanders died before the Syrian who supposedly infected her, but Connor avoids answering, muttering something about differences in immunity. Jake is sent to find the girl, and the authorities hope to hide the fact that the infected person is behind the fence. But it is no longer possible to help the blonde. The cops find her in serious condition in the apartment of old friends. The blonde and her friends are taken to the quarantine zone. But Lorms admits to Alex that the situation is too serious. The virus spreads faster than they could have anticipated. Alex calls his fiancée to reassure her, but he does not dare to tell her what the city is facing. The police have been ordered to strengthen the cordon and use weapons in case of violations. More people with symptoms of infection continue to arrive at the hospital. Among them, Jake sees many children, but the doctor says that this is not the worst. The hospital is running out of free beds, and soon there will be nowhere to isolate the sick. In addition to the bad news, the officer has an unpleasant task. Connor asks him to cremate the bodies to prevent outbreaks of other diseases. Another problem for the authorities is Leo Green, a local journalist. He continues to publish panic-inducing videos, and Lorms instructs Alex to stop the provocateur. The cop tries to negotiate with Leo, but the journalist is sure that the authorities are hiding something, and he must get to the truth. A few minutes later, a new video from Green appears online. this time attracting the president's attention. Jenna's colleagues realize that they will not have enough food until the end of the quarantine, and the men decide to go to the store. The girl does not like this idea, but the majority votes to take the risk. Teresa's mother also takes the situation lightly. The girl sees her mother raising prices on essential goods to make a profit. To entertain the children, Caddy takes them to the roof. This gives everyone a chance to breathe fresh air, but the girl does not have time to relax. Thomas runs away, ignoring the teacher's cries. The girl finds the student on the stairs, next to a sick man. Drops fall on the boy, and it becomes clear that he is now infected. Thomas is sent to isolation, and the teacher blames herself. She tells the doctor that she promised the boy's father to take care of Thomas, but let him down. The men return with full bags of groceries, but Jenna does not let them into the office. She notices that her friend took off his gloves, meaning he could have brought the virus on his hands. A customer who was charged too much brings her friends. They raid the store, but Teresa's mother is saved by Jake's appearance, who received orders to patrol the city. Caddy finds Thomas's ward empty. She catches up with the boy at the hospital exit, and his father refuses to leave his son in the quarantine zone. The doctors have no choice but to let the patient go. Alex's pleas have no effect on Leo, and in pursuit of a hot story, he allows his colleagues to leave the closed area. He is not even frightened by the fact that one of the girls has symptoms of the disease. Alex and Jake manage to meet secretly on neutral territory. Both guys are nervous, but they have to work together. Leo Green tells the whole world how to leave the closed area. The police have to hold back the crowd while workers cut the ladder. This leads to serious riots, and the cops have to open fire to kill. To prevent such incidents, the government shuts down the internet and phone communication, depriving everyone of the only joy, talking to each other. Caddy accidentally enters a closed room and learns the truth about the number of victims. Among them are her students. At the same time, Jenna also tries to get to the truth, and she assembles a radio phone to call Alex. The girl has to climb to the roof to get the antenna, where she meets Sam, a technician who hid on the roof to avoid infection. Alex changes partners and goes on night duty. In the middle of the night, he notices an intruder and asks him to stop. The criminal turns out to be Xander, who is trying to enter the danger zone to his fiancée, but the cop does not let him do it and pulls the trigger. The bullet turns out to be rubber, and Xander is simply taken to the hospital. The officer visits him and apologizes, but warns that he will do the same thing next time. Leo decides to take advantage of this. He is preparing a scandalous report about the abuse of power. The store is visited by robbers again, but this time Teresa is also in danger. However, unexpectedly, the women are saved by another gang planning to profit from the quarantine. By the end of the day, Xander's ward is empty. The nurse says he left with Leo Green, but Alex does not have time to stop them. The duty officer reports that the guy has entered the infection zone. Dr. Connor shows Jake the rats that were injected with the medicine. Unfortunately, right before the cop's eyes, the animal passes out, and the hope for a quick rescue disappears. Jenna manages to call Alex, but the call lasts only a few seconds. The girl does not have time to learn anything. Leo accidentally learns about the call. He again hints to the officer that he has taken the wrong side and should think about what is happening. In gratitude for his help, Leo asks Xander to visit his friends and record a video message with them. The guy completes the task and throws the flash drive over the wall, but on it, the journalist finds evidence that his friends are no longer alive. After this, Xander finally finds his fiancée, but raiders block his way. The general panic is compounded by a new problem: hunger. People's food supplies begin to run out, and the government is forced to find a solution. Walking down the corridor with her son, Caddy meets an old man who supplies the hospital with lab rats. The woman notices another inconsistency. She saw Bert with the rodents before the quarantine, but he assures her that this is not the case. Lammers asks Alex to organize food delivery to the danger zone. The policeman asks for time to prepare, but is refused. He must do it by tomorrow without explanation. Alex has to ask Jake for help. The guy is also not thrilled with the idea, but they have no other choice. Early in the morning, the loading begins, and hundreds of people come to get their rations. The gang from the store also gathers for the distribution, and the leader orders Xander to go with them to stay clean. Jenna goes outside for the first time in many days to get some food. She approaches the distribution center, but a gangster car passes by, making her uneasy. Jake recognizes his friend and gives her a ration without a queue. He also hands her Alex's keys and asks her to hold on, as everything should end soon. Constantly thinking about the epidemic and inconsistencies, Caddy again turns to the doctor with questions, but he is clearly not willing to talk about it. The doctor assures the teacher that he knows no more about the virus than she does. The humanitarian point is surrounded by the store gang. There are many more bandits, and they take the food boxes to sell them to hungry people later. Alex is furious that the leadership did not listen to him, and the products fell into the hands of bandits. But Lammers does not see this as a problem. She believes that residents still have a chance to buy food and satisfy their hunger. Jake's partner turns out to be infected, and the officer offers him help, but the officer refuses to go to the hospital. He knows that no one can help him, and decides to solve the problem on his own. Returning to the shelter, Jenna falls into the hands of other bandits who also try to take the box. The woman is saved by Sam, whom she recently refused to let into the office, but the friends remember Jenna's recent act and, despite everything, do not let her or Sam into the clean zone. Alex and Jake meet again, and the senior partner admits that he no longer trusts the leadership. He tells his friend that, due to the robbery, he had to leave his subordinate in the danger zone. At this moment, this very subordinate calls Chief Besser and reports that their plan worked. Jake tells Caddy that she was right, something is being hidden from them. Dr. Sanders and her boyfriend had no personal belongings, but the conversation has to be postponed. Thomas's sister is admitted to the hospital, asking the teacher to find the boy. Their father died, and Thomas is left alone. Alex also begins to doubt the leadership's honesty, and he goes to Leo's house to hear his version. He finds the journalist drunk, but the guy comes to his senses and promises to help in the search for answers. Despite Jacob's persuasion, Caddy goes in search of Thomas. The gang is joined by the very cop sent by the police chief. He promises the bandits a radio phone in exchange for being accepted into the group. Thomas is not at home, but Caddy discovers her son, who secretly followed her. Quentin tells his mother that he knows where to look for his friend, and the company heads to the baseball field. The search for the truth has to be postponed. Alex is tasked with removing a man from an empty house who is preventing it from being demolished. The cop has to spend a lot of time talking about the happy past the city has lost. Teresa's mother helps the lovers escape. She gives the couple a bag of baby things and tells them to wait for her in a safe place. The company finds Thomas's things, but they are surrounded by a crowd of crazy racers. Jake has to open fire, and only then do the young people continue to search for the boy. Caddy finds her son and his friend, but they are near an infected man. The teacher is frightened, but Thomas assures her that he cannot get infected. Xander and Teresa come to Jenna's office and ask for shelter. One of the girl's friends is against the couple entering, but Jenna lets the guests in without his approval. Thomas is placed in isolation, but Caddy has hope that the boy indeed has immunity and can save everyone. During the meeting, Alex hands Jake a flash drive with a damaged file. If it can be restored, they will learn the truth, but only Jenna can do it. In return, the officer also receives a memory card with a message for the old man from the empty house. When he delivers the message, the stubborn man cannot hold back his tears. Teresa sorts through the baby things and finds the radio phone her mother stole. At that moment, the phone's owners appear at the door, holding a gun to the girl's mother's head. The company has to open the door, but the bandit refuses to take the phone and leave. He demands that Teresa and her boyfriend go with him. Unexpectedly, Jake comes to the rescue. He convinces the gangster to leave the office alone. Alex sees hundreds of people moving in an unknown direction, but no one can say where they will be placed. Jenna tries to open the file, but it is severely damaged. The girl does not have time to do anything with it. New guests appear in the office, a gang wanting access to prohibited drugs. The company begins to strengthen their shelter, but the intruders find weak spots through which they manage to penetrate inside. Tony decides to take a risk. He goes down to negotiate with the criminals, but the negotiations fail. The elevator returns Tony with an axe in his back. In addition to the deceased guy, one of the attackers enters the office, but he does not have time to harm anyone. The guy is infected and collapses at the entrance to the room. Jenna finally manages to restore the file, but the girl does not have time to watch it. The power goes out in the office, and all the doors are locked. To restore power, Jenna has to leave the shelter and go downstairs. Meanwhile, the bandits almost manage to open the elevator doors, but the girl raises the switch in time. On the way back, Jenna takes the radio phone and calls Alex. Talking to his fiancée, the officer hears her being attacked. The girl manages to break free and return to the office, but the intruders do not retreat and try to cut through the door. The company has no choice but to come up with the craziest plan. Alex tries to penetrate the closed zone to help his fiancée, but he is caught by the National Guard soldiers. Jenna orders everyone to take cover, and when the psychos burst into the office, Jake activates an explosive device. A fire starts, but all the attackers are unconscious. Unexpectedly, one of them jumps up and attacks Teresa's mother. The men manage to neutralize him, but the woman is infected. Alex is arrested, but unaware of this, Jenna asks Jake to call her fiancé and calm him down. She also mentions that the phone the bandits had has a government military number and they need to figure out how it ended up in the infection zone. Teresa's mother leaves. As a farewell, she asks her daughter for forgiveness for not wanting to accept her child. More than 48 hours have passed since Thomas's contact with the infected, and the boy continues to look healthy. His DNA is implanted in rats to try to create a vaccine. Connor reports his observations to the leadership, but the boss tells the guy that they don't have time for experiments. Caddy and Jake review footage from surveillance cameras and find out that the zero patient was not the immigrant boy, but a certain Henry Burns. He came every morning to secretly meet with Dr. Sanders, and judging by the man's behavior, he knew about his illness. Dr. Connor allows Thomas to leave and informs everyone that the boy does not just have immunity, his body defeated the virus. This means that based on his DNA, they will be able to make a cure for the unknown virus. Jenna leads her friends to a church under which there are ancient tunnels. The girl plans to lead the group out of the cordon through them to safety. Alex tells Leo everything he learned from Jake, but the journalist cannot find any trace of Henry Burns. The men get the impression that the zero patient was deliberately sent to the hospital. Lammers returns Alex's badge and authority, but in return she demands that the cop take Thomas out of the infected zone and hand him over for experiments in her unit. Dr. Connor disagrees with Lammers' decision, but she rejects all objections and insists that only her laboratory can find the cure. Everyone has hope for a quick return to peace and normal life. It seems not everyone will live to see this happy moment, but some decide not to waste time and enjoy the moment, using all possible safety measures. Leo finds out that 2 days before the epidemic started, Burns received a package with the virus. Now he wants to know who the sender was, but Alex asks him to postpone the investigation so he can carry out the order. All night the company breaks through the exit to the tunnel, and in the morning they finally go underground. At the same time, Caddy and Jake go to the meeting place to hand Thomas over to Alex. Dr. Connor realizes he was wrong. The patient bitten by a rat injected with Thomas's DNA is infected. During the seizure, he infects several more people, and the doctor understands that the boy is an asymptomatic carrier. If he leaves the cordon, the virus will take over the entire city. The company has to return due to gas that has accumulated underground. They remain in the infection zone. Meanwhile, Thomas ends up in the hold the zone between districts. He is met by Alex and Dr. Lammers, but at the last moment, the transfer is cancelled and the boy is sent back. While Alex tries to figure out what to do next, he receives a voice message from Leo. The journalist claims that the virus was created by Connor. Alex and Lammers remain in quarantine in the container between the zones. Thomas is returned to the clinic and quarantined to figure out what to do next. Jenna's company returns. The group could not go underground due to accumulated gas, but the office is empty. Teresa and Xander left to find a cleaner place. On the main street, the guy begins to suspect he was wrong. Hundreds of protesters are holding a rally demanding to be released from the infected zone. Xander tries to protect the girl from the crowd, but Teresa sees her mother in the crowd and tries to break through to her. Not wanting to risk his pregnant girlfriend, the guy decides to check who she saw in the crowd. Jake arranges a date for Caddy, and the couple has a great time until a frightened Quentin runs into the room. The boy says that old man Ray took the other children and led them out of the hospital to break through with the others. Leo meets with an ex-girlfriend and asks her to get Connor's call details. He has no doubt that the doctor's to blame, but to prove it, he needs facts. Xander realizes that Teresa was mistaken, but as a result, he encounters an infected person. The boy manages to escape. Unlike Bert, the old man has his box of medicine taken from him and falls to the ground. The street riots intensify, and a squad is sent to the danger zone. Lammers tries to stop the captain, but he does not listen to the doctor's orders, and several vehicles head through the cordon. Jake finds Ray, but the girl he took with him is not there. The old man abandoned her because of virus symptoms. Caddy spots Mary before Jake can tell her about the infection, and the woman takes the child into her arms despite the blood. The crazed crowd pushes Teresa to the ground. Xander runs to her but is afraid to touch his girlfriend for fear of infecting her. When Jake finds his friend, it becomes clear that she is now also sick. Caddy realizes this from her boyfriend's look, and upon returning to the hospital, tries to wash off all traces of the infection. Leo gets the information he needs, but it does not match his assumptions. Moreover, his friend tells the journalist that Burns called someone on an encrypted phone that only high-ranking officials can have that day. Susie, Jenna's friend, confesses that she is expecting a baby. Going for a test to check this, Jenna meets Xander and Teresa, who stayed on the street after the riot. Caddy ends up in isolation, and Jake tries to support her, but the girl's nerves can no longer withstand it. After 48 hours, Dr. Lammers and Alex are released from the container. There are only 8 hours left until the end of Caddy's quarantine. At the same time, Teresa's baby is about to be born. Alex visits Leo and finds out that on the day of the infection, Burns did not call Connor, but Lammers. There is no doubt that she started the epidemic for some personal purpose. Dr. Connor conducts his first round after leaving isolation. When he reaches Caddy, he admits that he cannot release her. The onset of symptoms has increased, and 48 hours is no longer a guarantee of health. The soldiers who participated in stopping the riot were infected. Lammers reports this to the journalists, but she promises to find a cure and save the country. At Alex's request, Jake inspects the apartment of Leo's friends, who were also investigating. There he finds ashes, all that remains of the documents and evidence. When friends meet to discuss this, Alex realizes that Lammers and the police chief are involved. Dennis, the father of Susan's child, returns to the office, but the man shows signs of infection on his face, and the company refuses to let him in. To make it easier for the man, Susan tells him that there was a mistake. She is not pregnant, and he has nothing to blame himself for. Alex meets with the chief and says he knows the truth, but it turns out that Besser did not know that Lammers released the virus into the masses. Jenna and Susan fail to ease Teresa's pain, but as usual, Jake appears at the right time. The guy calms the young mother and helps her daughter be born. Alex asks Leo not to publish material against Lammers until they have substantial evidence. An argument begins between the men, and the journalist agrees to wait no more than 2 hours. Not wanting to waste time, Alex goes directly to the doctor and asks her to resign. Lammers tries to intimidate the officer, but when she realizes he is not joking, the woman promises to hold a conference and leave her post. Teresa shows Xander their daughter, and the baby is placed in a crib made of boxes. Jake tells Caddy about this joyful event, but the girl's delight is overshadowed by a cough with traces of blood. Lammers gives a press conference, but does not admit her guilt. She claims that Dr. Connor accidentally released the virus. Still unaware of this, Connor conducts experiments and tries to find a cure. Jake asks him to try to save Caddy, and the doctor agrees to give her a trial dose of serum from Thomas's blood. Old man Bert regains consciousness and discovers that his leg is broken. Despite this, he finds the box of medicine and tries to get home, where his wife has been waiting for him all this time. Connor learns what Lammers did. He does not understand why his colleague did this to him, but despite this, the doctor does not give up trying to save Caddy. Giving her the injection, Connor tells the girl how the virus penetrated their clinic. Jenna meets Bert and gives him her water. She also gives the old man a cart so he can finally reach his wife. After the injection, Caddy gets worse. She is tormented by nightmares and barely waits until morning. To support his friend, Jake brings a TV and invites her to the movies. The couple spends the whole day together, but Caddy gets worse again, and she decides to confess her love to her boyfriend, fearing that there may not be another chance. Jenna tells her friend about her conversation with the gangsters. Trader Miz offered her a route to the healthy zone, but it is very expensive. Sam agrees to contribute his share, but only if Jenna agrees to leave the others and go with him. Alex goes to Leo's apartment, which turns out to be empty. After losing, the journalist refused to fight Lammers, but later the cop receives a pizza from a friend, in which Leo left him a note with an address and a key. Caddy gets worse by the minute, and Jake prepares to say goodbye to his friend. He asks the doctor to help him put on a protective suit, and when the girl falls to the floor, the boyfriend takes her hand to ease her suffering. The doctor tells Jake that he can say goodbye to Caddy's body, which is waiting for cremation. For the first time since their acquaintance, the guy manages to touch his friend's face without gloves. Jenna tells her friends about the opportunity to leave and suggests finding the money. But Teresa refuses to go. She wants her daughter to grow up a little. Arriving at the address Leo sent him, Alex finds evidence that will help him punish Lammers. Teresa, Xander, and their newborn daughter reach Bert's house, Teresa's grandfather. The young mother plans to stay at her relative's house until the end of quarantine, but seeing the empty shelves, Xander insists that they must run. Alex learns about a certain Catherine Hops, whose son was connected with Lammers. From her, the man learns the address of the laboratory and heads there. While Dr. Connor tries to create a cure, news about him spreads throughout the zone. A gang breaks into the clinic wanting to punish the doctor, but Jake convinces them that he needs to be protected to be the first to get the vaccine. This is the last thing Jake can do before leaving. He decides to run through the cordon to save Quentin. Alex inspects the abandoned lab and finds solid evidence of Lammers' guilt. He accuses her and names a True Zero patient who fell ill several years ago. This time, Lammers does not argue. She admits she created the virus and believes it is needed for the country's safety. But now she asks Alex to postpone the battle and focus on fighting the virus, which has now crossed the cordon. An attack occurs in the hospital, and one of the gangsters becomes infected. Dr. Connor has to give him the test drug. It is his only chance not to become a victim of the bandits. Jake prepares Quentin to cross into the healthy zone and promises to find him as soon as it is all over. Jenna's company also prepares to go underground to cross the cordon. At the same time, the body of the boy who tried to take the risk is examined and an army is assembled so that no one else can cross the border. To prevent illegal crossings, the tunnels are mined and blown up. Alex tries to stop it, understanding that there may be people there, but the captain refuses to make concessions. Unaware of the government's plans, Miz orders the fugitives to prepare to descend into the tunnel. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Dr. Connor transfuses Thomas's blood to the infected gangster, hoping this will cure him. Despite all attempts, the gangster cannot be saved. Because of this, Jake has to save the doctor. The gang leader cannot forgive him for the loss of his brother. The explosions catch the group deep in the tunnel. The ceiling begins to collapse, and the company is divided. Teresa, Xander, and their baby are left alone. Connor finds a way to make the medicine, but for this he needs people with the same blood as Thomas. Jake tries to find volunteers, but no one wants to participate in the dangerous experiment. Then the guy prepares a speech in which he names all the dead. For their sake, Jake asks people to get tested and, in case of a match, become donors. Miz leads the group to a dead end, but the guide does not give up and looks for new exits. Alex learns about this and asks Lammers to stop the explosions and bring people to the surface. As an exception, Lammers promises the officer 1 hour. After that, all tunnels will be destroyed. Jake's words convince people and they gather to get tested. Xander takes his family to Teresa's mother's store and the girl decides to stay there until the end. The doctor finds blood with antibodies. A local priest can be a donor for the medicine. Old man Bert spills the last bottle of wine and adds a secret ingredient to it. He and his wife raise their glasses to toast that their suffering ends. Hugging on the couch, the couple prepares to go to a better world. Alex finds the fugitives, among whom he sees Jenna. The girl assures her fiancé will let them into the clean zone, but Alex does not know what to do. His time is running out. Dr. Lammers orders the tunnels destroyed, but at this moment, Leo's report about everything the blonde did appears on the screens. Alex does not let the fugitives go, but returns to the quarantine zone with them. And Jake, scattering Caddy's ashes over the city, prepares for a new battle with the virus that changed the world. The episode opens with a flashback, capturing the moment Franklin first encounters Irene in a bar. Their meeting is sparked by a serendipitous pool shot that Franklin uses as an opening to engage Irene in conversation. This marks the beginning of their relationship. Leaping ahead about half a century, the narrative catches up with Franklin and Irene, now an elderly couple, deeply in love. Although Irene is confined to a wheelchair, their affection remains strong. Franklin assists her outside, aiming to share a view of the night sky together. They venture to a shed, where a hidden underground tunnel leads them to an unusual door. Upon entering, they find themselves mysteriously elevated to an interstellar viewing platform, as if transported among the stars. Franklin has observed Irene's growing desire to gaze at the stars more frequently over the last year. They visited their special spot a total of 865 times, with visits increasing since Irene's fall the previous year. Attempting to understand her insistence, Franklin finally confesses that he's grown weary of their regular excursions to the stars. He's ready to hand over their secret responsibility to someone else. However, Irene firmly believes that this mystery is theirs alone to decipher. Meanwhile, their neighbor Byron is suspicious that Franklin and Irene are concealing something in their shed, and he's determined to uncover it. The next morning, as they were driving away, Byron hurried to their car, but Franklin, who views him as an irritating busybody, didn't appreciate the intrusion. Later, while attempting to mow his lawn, Franklin brushes him off completely. Back at his house, Byron shares his suspicions with his wife Janine, who advises him to stay out of their neighbor's affairs, insisting it's none of their business. In the car, Irene suggests that Franklin could be friendlier to Byron, but Franklin dismisses the idea. Irene persists, encouraging him to cultivate friendships rather than focusing solely on her. Later, Franklin and Irene visit the hospital. Irene sees her doctor, who plans to run some tests as her symptoms appear to be worsening, although her exact condition remains unspecified. While Irene was with the doctor, Franklin went to run some errands. He then got a call from his granddaughter Denise and ended up going for lunch with her. She's worried about them, having heard from a neighbor that they're roaming around in the middle of the night going for strolls. Franklin passes it off as simply watching the stars, but Denise is not so sure. She's worried and broaches the idea of them leaving the house. Franklin vehemently declines. While Franklin is away, Irene seizes the opportunity to visit an old friend named Sadie at a care home. During her visit, she is disheartened to see Sadie's deteriorating mental state. Feeling the need to confide in someone, Irene shares her secret with Sadie, explaining that she's been on special journeys but is also grappling with a serious illness. When Franklin returns to pick her up, they both look visibly exhausted, the relentless march of time eroding their mental faculties. This is particularly evident with Franklin, who is showing signs of senility, forgetting essential tasks such as refueling the car and picking up Irene from the doctor's office. At their home, Byron is proudly showing Janine his new campaign sign, excited about his run for councilman. Janine suggests he could delay his campaign until next year, but Byron is eager to start immediately. After their conversation, Byron sneaks over to Irene and Franklin's house to snoop around. While investigating, he receives a text from Janine prompting him to leave abruptly. Back at home, the conversation turns to the inevitability of death. Irene encourages Franklin to embrace life fully and consider moving on from their home should she pass away before him. After spending a pleasant evening together, Franklin begins to sing to Irene, but soon falls asleep. However, Irene is restless and ready to take action. She writes a note for Franklin, expressing her decision to take control of her situation while she still has the ability. In the note, she promises to see him again and leaves it by the chair as she prepares to leave the house. Irene intends to visit the Martian landscape on her own, a place they've often traveled to together. Just as she is about to leave, she discovers someone lying on the floor, struggling to breathe and desperately seeking her help. The next morning, Franklin is awakened by the sight of Irene crawling toward the house, breathing heavily. She urgently tells him that there's someone in the shed. With concern, Franklin grabs a hammer for protection and goes to investigate. Downstairs, he discovers a stranger doubled over in pain. Franklin immediately assumes the man is a junkie seeking refuge, but Irene senses something more troubling. Adding to the mystery, the man is covered in blood without any visible wounds. Concerned, Franklin decides to call the police. Officer Thomas soon arrives at the scene. He conducts a thorough check of the premises to ensure there are no immediate threats. Meanwhile, the camera subtly focuses on Franklin's back, revealing a patch of blood spatter on his right shoulder, a result of him carrying the bloodied stranger. As Officer Thomas prepares to inspect the upper floor, Irene pulls him aside for a private conversation. She confides in him that Franklin's mental state is deteriorating and that he might be seeing things that aren't there. Her intervention convinces the officer, and he leaves the property under the assumption that the incident was a hallucination on Franklin's part. Meanwhile, the narrative introduces another subplot featuring Stella and her daughter, Tony. They are far from the urban hustle, in the serene mountains leading llamas across the vast, rolling hills, a stark contrast to the urban school environment Tony usually frequents. That evening, Tony welcomes Matthias to their house, believing this could be the beginning of a new friendship. However, unbeknownst to her, Matthias has an ulterior motive. He reveals that he was dared to visit what is rumored to be a haunted house and was offered 4,000 pesos to step inside, casting a shadow over their budding interaction. The local rumors swirling around Tony's grandfather's involvement in cultish activities have piqued the curiosity of the local kids, including Matthias. This revelation devastates Tony, who had mistakenly believed that Matthias's visit was the beginning of a romantic interest. When Stella arrives and finds Tony with Matthias, she quickly intervenes and shoos him away. After dealing with the situation, Stella takes a secretive path to the back of an old church nearby. There, hidden from plain view, is a door that strikingly resembles the one found in Franklin and Irene's shed, suggesting a deeper, mysterious connection between the two locations. Back to Franklin and Irene, as the situation at their home becomes more dire, the stranger on their floor suddenly passes out and starts convulsively shaking. Irene, recognizing the symptoms from a past experience, suspects it could be related to a virus she once battled. She quickly sends Franklin out to get a refill of Tamiflu, hoping it might help. While Franklin is away, Irene takes the opportunity to sift through the stranger's belongings. She finds numerous gold coins and a photograph labeled Gabriel, suggesting a possible identity or connection. With the man coughing uncontrollably and in obvious distress, Irene decides to take matters into her own hands. She prepares a homemade remedy she hopes will alleviate his symptoms and begins to read aloud from a book she found among his possessions, trying to soothe him with her voice. Byron, eager to gather support for his councilman campaign, is out trying to collect signatures from the locals, but he's finding it difficult to get any cooperation. Spotting Franklin entering the pharmacy, Byron seizes the opportunity and approaches him for his signature. However, Franklin declines and hurries inside the pharmacy. Inside, Franklin encounters a new pharmacist who isn't familiar with him or his prescription history. To ensure everything is in order, the pharmacist decides to call the doctor for verification before dispensing any medication. The doctor, wanting to discuss the situation directly, asks to speak with Franklin. This unexpected complication adds another layer to Franklin's already stressful day. Stella, unable to find Tony inside their house, grows anxious and decides to search for her by car. She eventually locates Tony and decides to take her to a restaurant to talk and give her advice over a meal. Tony expresses her feelings of isolation and the mockery she faces from peers because of the mysterious reputation of their house. Stella responds by hinting at a deeper family secret, explaining that every family member is a guardian of something significant, and assures Tony that she will understand her role when the time is right. Their conversation is abruptly interrupted when Stella receives a notification that the alarm at their house has been triggered. Alarmed, they rush back home to check on the situation. Meanwhile, back at Franklin and Irene's place, the stranger regains consciousness and introduces himself as Jude. He's uncertain of his origins, but believes he might be from the mountains. Jude also recalls being carried, which Irene and Franklin assume must have been Franklin's doing, though Franklin has no memory of it. Upon returning with the Tamiflu, Franklin displays a cautious demeanor toward Jude. Unlike Irene, who shows concern and willingness to help, Franklin is reticent and distant, focusing more on Irene as she starts to feel woozy and faint, indicating his primary concern remains her well-being. Denise, who is struggling to stay alert during her lecture, is fortunately assisted by a fellow student named Cliff, who offers her a cup of coffee. This small gesture leads to a connection between the two. They went out for a drink, and she told him about her family, but that was not entirely the truth. She told him she has taken on the significant responsibility of looking after Franklin and Irene. He asked why her father couldn't do it, but she brushed it off, saying he is busy. Meanwhile, a tense conversation unfolds between Franklin and Irene. Franklin confronts Irene about a secret she's been keeping concerning Dr. Maurice's advice. Irene agrees to follow the doctor's instructions, but in return she asks for Franklin's support as she continues to investigate the mysterious doorway and its significance. Although hesitant, Franklin begrudgingly agrees to support her quest. After receiving the notification of the alarm, Stella returns home with a gun, only to discover that an old friend has broken into her house. The intruder questions whether Stella is training Tony, hinting at a connection to the same mysterious elements tied to the doorway. That night, after Franklin has warned Jude not to harm Irene, Jude finds himself unable to sleep. As Denise and Cliff are about to depart, she tells him that she had lied in their conversation earlier, and she told him about her personal challenges, including the emotional weight of her father's voluntary death when she was just 5 years old. Jude quietly takes Irene's letter and stealthily moves through the house. Jude's actions take a startling turn when he retreats to the bathroom with a knife. There, he carefully cuts into his leg, revealing a strange cylindrical object embedded beneath his skin. It appears to be some kind of tracking device. Understanding the implications of being tracked, Jude decisively crushes the device, ensuring it can no longer function. After dealing with the device, he slips out into the night. Franklin delves into the mystery of the gold coins he found among the stranger's belongings. He takes them to a local trader who identifies them as Spanish doubloons, but the exact origin of their minting remains uncertain. Simultaneously, Stella confronts the intruder she found in her home. She sends Tony out and questions him about his presence. He responds by handing her a paper, describing it as a special assignment, and insists that she involve Tony. Meanwhile, Franklin, showing a gesture of care, returns home with a bag of clothes for Jude, the stranger who recently revealed his name. However, he specifically avoids giving Jude any of Michael's belongings, as the memories associated with them are still painfully fresh. Responding to Jude's simple request for food, they all head to a diner. The outing takes an uncomfortable turn when Jude becomes ill and vomits during the ride home. Denise is presented with a significant opportunity by her superior Mark. She's been invited to join a newly forming research group which promises a substantial salary increase but also requires a hefty time commitment. This new role would not only be a step up in her career but would also demand she manage it alongside her ongoing internship, essentially doubling her workload. Faced with the potential benefits and the daunting prospect of increased stress, Denise feels torn and unsure about whether to accept the offer. Throughout these events, fragments of Jude's past begin to surface in his mind. He recalls snippets of his life before arriving arriving at the Yorks, including a conflict with another individual. Byron comes under fire for forging signatures on his campaign. He received a call, and he was told to put his campaign in suspension to not face legal matters. Franklin, acting on Irene's suggestion, takes Jude out for some male bonding in an attempt to better understand the mysterious guest. They spend the day playing chess, a setting that gives Franklin ample time to evaluate Jude's character and intentions. Despite the shared activity, Franklin's suspicions grow, and he concludes that Jude might be a con artist. Convinced that it's best for Jude to leave, Franklin decides to give him $5,000 to help him on his way and drives him to the bus station. However, as Jude prepares to board the bus, Franklin begins to have second thoughts about his decision. The complexity of the situation and perhaps a sense of unresolved doubt lead Franklin to reluctantly invite Jude back, allowing him another chance to prove his intentions and possibly clarify his mysterious connection to their family. At home, Irene makes a startling discovery among Jude's possessions, a mysterious orb that seems to have the ability to disintegrate matter. When she places it on the coffee table, the table vanishes without a trace, leaving her both amazed and alarmed. Meanwhile, Denise decides to visit her grandparents and encounters Jude, who they introduce as their new caretaker. Denise is skeptical of Jude, especially given the peculiar circumstances of his arrival and the strange incidents surrounding him. Although Irene suggests that Denise should head home rather than stay the night, Denise leaves, but not without instructing Jude on her grandparents' needs and expectations. She opts to stay with a friend, driven by a resolve to uncover Jude's true identity. Later that night, Jude has a private conversation with Irene. He confides that he believes his presence at their home is no coincidence. Jude reveals that he is searching for his father, named Gabriel, the same name on the Polaroid found earlier, and he seeks Irene's assistance in this personal quest. In another part of the house, Franklin discovers a bloodied knife in the bathroom. While cleaning up, he notices fragments of the mysterious orb that Irene had found, now broken and swirling up through the sink. Unfortunately, the water quickly washes them away before Franklin can examine them further, deepening the mystery of the strange object and its capabilities. Byron, undeterred by previous accusations of meddling, finds himself unable to resist the lure of the mysterious activities at the Yorks' residence. Driven by curiosity, he sneaks into their property and makes his way to the shed. Inside, he navigates through the clutter until he confronts the secret door, the very threshold that seems to be the heart of the enigmas surrounding Franklin and Irene. Meanwhile, the narrative shifts back to Stella and Tony. In a parallel scene reminiscent of earlier discoveries, Stella takes Tony to a secretive doorway located behind the chapel, a portal similar to the one in the Yorks' shed, but with a distinct feature. This doorway is equipped with a strange control panel that Stella manipulates to set their destination. After entering a sequence of commands, Stella and Tony step through the doorway and find themselves instantly transported to New York City. The scene unfolds with Jude awakening from a distressing nightmare where he's embroiled in a fierce fight with another man. Shaken, he decides to take the mysterious orb he discovered earlier and buries it outside to keep it safe. As he is digging, Byron appears, asserting that this is a private area. Jude, claiming his role as the caretaker, brushes off Byron's curiosity and leaves without divulging any further information. Meanwhile, Franklin's suspicions about Jude continue to deepen, especially after finding the bloodied knife. Determined to uncover Jude's true identity, Franklin visits Officer Thomas, hoping to persuade him to conduct a DNA test on the knife. However, Thomas dismisses the need for such measures, viewing Franklin's elaborate theories as further evidence of his deteriorating mental state. In another part of town, Jude and Irene visit a library where Jude searches through records and discovers that his father had been arrested due to homelessness and claimed amnesia at the time of his arrest. When Irene shares this information with Franklin, he responds with a lighthearted joke, suggesting that forgetfulness must run in Jude's family. Elsewhere, Stella and Tony are navigating their own mysterious venture with a contact named Nick. He leads them to an abandoned warehouse where a machine starts emitting what appears to be serial numbers. Nick explains that while he can help narrow down their search, he will need to accompany them to accurately pinpoint the source of the signal. Throughout this ordeal, Tony remains confused and uncertain about the overarching purpose of their mission, highlighting her struggle to grasp the full scope of their enigmatic activities. Denise finds a temporary respite from her demanding schedule by staying at her friend Katie's place. She wakes up there one morning and opens up about the extreme stress she's been under lately, finding comfort in sharing her struggles with a friend. Back at Irene and Franklin's home, tensions rise to a breaking point. Franklin, increasingly troubled by the unfolding events, accuses Irene of favoring Jude over him. Despite Irene's attempts to clarify her intentions and reassure him, Franklin remains skeptical about the situation and abruptly leaves the house, overwhelmed by doubt and frustration. In a parallel scenario, Byron, who has been actively campaigning campaigning for a council seat, reaches a moment of disillusionment. In a symbolic gesture of giving up on his political aspirations, he burns all his campaign signs. As he does this, he notices Franklin driving away. Byron tries to offer a friendly smile and greeting, but the moment is fleeting. After Franklin's departure, Irene confronts Jude about his secretive demeanor. She expresses her concerns about him not sharing details of his life, to which Jude responds with a pained smile, acknowledging her care despite his reticence. Chandra, a nurse who previously worked in the caretaker's house, arrives at Irene and Franklin's home under the guise of offering her freelance services. She reveals that she's now freelancing, though in reality, she was fired for stealing. When Irene informs her that Jude has taken over caretaker duties, Chandra asks to use the bathroom, handing Irene her business card to distribute to any friends in need of her services. However, seizing the opportunity, she sneakily enters Jude's room after her bathroom visit and steals something from him. Meanwhile, Jude handles a phone call with Dale from the pawnbrokers, who speaks about the significant value of the gold coins associated with Jude. Jude, pretending to be Franklin's son during the call, is visibly unsettled by the conversation about the coin's value. After the call, Jude contacts someone, possibly seeking advice or information about the coins. The conversation is cryptic, with the person on the other end uttering Fiat voluntas Dei, which translates to God's will be done, suggesting a deeper, possibly religious or philosophical significance to the coins. Shortly after, Irene comes by to pay Jude for his work and reassures him of her support, irrespective of the mystery surrounding him. However, after Chandra's earlier visit, Jude discovers that an item, a rectangular slab previously hinted at, is missing from his belongings. He quickly connects the theft to Chandra, snatches her business card from the dresser, and heads to the local bar, presumably to track her down and retrieve his stolen item. At a local bar, a series of unexpected encounters and revelations unfold. Jude, who is trying to track down Chandra, ends up at the same bar where Denise and her friend Katie are unwinding. Denise approaches Jude, and they strike up a lively interaction involving shots and dancing. Meanwhile, Byron finds himself in a pool hall where he unexpectedly runs into Franklin. The two begin playing pool, and Byron confronts Franklin about a recent campaign stunt, suspecting Franklin had tipped off the authorities. Franklin firmly denies these allegations, and despite an initially frosty interaction, the two men find common ground. Franklin confides his fears about Irene's feelings toward him, while Byron shares his own personal struggles about feeling like a second choice to his wife, Janine, whom he describes as a consolation prize. Their conversation deepens, and both men, now heavily intoxicated, step outside the bar. Here, Byron admits he may have misjudged Franklin and probes about the mysterious doorway. Franklin, trying to dismiss it as merely a bomb shelter, is finally persuaded by Byron's persistence to show him the site. However, when they reach the supposed transportive shelter, it fails to operate, leaving Byron to laugh it off as a hoax, thinking it's just a bizarre construction. Simultaneously, Irene wakes to find Jude missing and decides to drive out to find him. As she searches, Jude, leaving the bar, is stopped by the police. The confrontation triggers traumatic memories of a past altercation where he had to defend himself, explaining the previously noted blood. As Irene drives past, she sees Jude face down on the hood of a police car, being detained, a sight that shocks and worries her about his fate. In the police station, Irene confronts a distressed Jude, who has run off and now finds himself entangled in a legal predicament. Urging him to be honest, Irene demands the truth if she is to help him. Jude, finally opening up, reveals that he was held in an isolated compound designed to guard the secret of the doorway, an enigmatic portal leading to what he describes as a barren alien planet, not the symbolic gateway others might believe it to be. Jude further explains that the blood found on him was from an altercation with men who tried to prevent his escape from the compound. The stakes are high, as these individuals, should they find him, intend to kill him. Jude's ultimate mission is to locate Gabriel, who had previously ventured through the same mysterious doorway. With this newfound understanding, Irene manages to persuade the police to release Jude. On their way home, Irene attempts to downplay the significance of her own doorway. However, Jude insists that their doorway is part of a larger destiny, making it one of the most crucial portals among many. Meanwhile, the subplot with Tony, Stella, and Nick sheds light on the scientific and mystical dimensions of the doorways. They discover that the doorways are connected by invisible particles that span vast distances. While Stella views this phenomenon as a divine gift, Nick adheres to a scientific interpretation. Their quest to locate a specific package leads them to a massive transmission tower. Nick breaks into the network to pinpoint the package's location. However, their operation is nearly compromised when a utility worker arrives. Thinking quickly, Stella subdues the worker, securing him to his van's steering wheel with cable ties, thus thus ensuring their mission continues uninterrupted. As Nick and Tony proceed to their next destination in Illinois, Tony remains quiet, still processing the events from earlier. Meanwhile, Denise visits Irene and Franklin's house while they are at the doctor's, intending to return a jacket Franklin left at the bar. During her visit, she casually inquires about Jude's father, sparking a light-hearted response from him. Their interaction is interrupted by Irene, who returns with positive news from the doctor. Franklin takes a proactive step towards proving the existence of the alien landscape by handing Byron a disposable camera with undeveloped photos and urging him to get them developed as proof. In another subplot, Irene and Jude visit Chandra's place to recover the items she took. While Irene distracts Chandra with fabricated concerns about Jude, he sneaks upstairs and finds both the strange black trinket and a necklace containing a similar device to what was on his leg. Confronting Chandra, she defensively claims the items were gifts from those at the care home. Irene, seeking further information, promises to keep Chandra's secret in exchange for the source of the necklace. This revelation links the necklace to the tracking devices, explaining why Jude was so keen to destroy the one in his leg. Byron, having developed the photos, finds evidence of the alien world, capturing images of Irene and Franklin in that setting. Meanwhile, Stella, in a distressing episode in the woods, experiences flashbacks of her mother's death, adding emotional depth and backstory to her character. Byron's curiosity leads him to research conspiracy theories online, where he discovers a reference to the impossible door, a concept sketched by an Argentine missionary in 1723, which he connects to their mysterious doorway. Back at the doorway, Franklin and Byron inspect the area and notice bloody fingerprints on the control panel, the same type found at Stella's portal. Upon opening the control panel, they realize the orb is missing, which Jude had previously buried. Byron, piecing together clues from his observations in the woods, locates the buried jar and recovers the orb, further entangling himself in the mysteries surrounding the doorway and its secrets. The scene opens with a strained atmosphere at the dinner table, where Irene casually discusses teaching Jude how to drive. Franklin, however, remains detached from the conversation, his disinterest culminating in him excusing himself to take out the trash. During this mundane chore, he stumbles upon a letter from Irene, the contents of which shake his very foundations. Confronted with his feelings, Franklin accuses Jude of bringing turmoil into their home. Jude's retort, questioning the true source of the household's issues, leaves Franklin even more unsettled, prompting him to walk away from the confrontation. Meanwhile, in Illinois, Tony and Stella settle into a motel for the night. The situation escalates when Nick, having brought the orb with him, carelessly plays with it in the presence of a hired companion. Stella intervenes, dismissing the hooker and sternly reminding Nick of the peril they face, citing the tragic fate of his brother as a grim warning. Elsewhere, Byron, brimming with excitement, catches up with Franklin to discuss his discovery of the orb. However, Franklin, overwhelmed by personal troubles, dismissively informs Byron that he's preoccupied with other matters. In a significant turn of events, Denise decides to quit school, a decision that has been looming for several chapters. Her friend reacts negatively, driving Denise to leave and join Jude on his quest. Jude shares new details about his father, Gabriel, who similarly had to cut a tracker out of his leg after escaping shadowy pursuers. Returning to the domestic front, Franklin, after spending a night at Byron's, confronts Irene about the discovered letter and her perceived broken promises. The confrontation underscores the deep fractures in their marriage, revealing a relationship in crisis. Concurrently, Byron attempts to operationalize the orb by placing it in the control panel in the basement shed. Despite his efforts, the mechanism fails to activate due to insufficient power. Tensions between Nick and Stella continue to simmer, with Nick provocatively mentioning Stella's late brother, Caleb. Stella reacts violently, punching Nick and leaving him with a bloody nose as she takes off with the van, stranding him at the motel. Jude, driven by the quest to trace his father's footsteps, decides to embark on a road trip to a remote area in Michigan. Denise, eager for the journey and the stories it may uncover, joins him. Irene, seeking a sense of adventure and perhaps a new purpose beyond her routine life, decides to accompany them, despite Franklin's decision to stay behind. For Franklin, their marriage and the life they built together have always been sufficient, but Irene yearns for more, highlighting a growing divide between their desires and aspirations. Back at home, Franklin handles unexpected business regarding the Spanish doubloons. He receives a call from Dale, the pawnbroker, who is eager to learn more about the origin of these rare coins. Franklin is bewildered, especially since it was Jude who initially dealt with Dale about the coins. Unable to provide answers and feeling confused, Franklin hangs up. This interruption is timely, as Byron urgently summons him to show him something new. Byron leads Franklin to the basement of the shed, where he has set up a large generator generator. His plan is to charge the circuitry connected to the doorway, hoping to provide enough power to activate it. They proceed with the setup, and the activation causes a massive surge of energy. The blast sends shock waves through the neighborhood, disrupting electrical systems and affecting the natural environment, evidenced by flickering lights and birds dropping from the sky. Simultaneously, Stella and Tony, who had been tracking related anomalies, receive a precise ping on their equipment indicating the location they need to head towards, spurred by the energy surge from the doorway. In the shed's basement, the power-up is successful, and Franklin and Byron find themselves transported to the alien viewpoint. They are greeted by a breathtakingly beautiful vista, a stark contrast to the mundane world they've left behind. Overwhelmed by the beauty and the surreal experience, Byron expresses a desire to explore further, but this time, Franklin, who has previously been apprehensive about such adventures, admits that he is no longer afraid. This moment marks a significant personal breakthrough for Franklin, reflecting his readiness to embrace the unknown. Franklin reveals to Byron the spacesuits he's been designing for years, but never had the courage to use. Inspired, Byron vows to help make them functional. Meanwhile, Irene, Jude, and Denise arrive in Michigan at the home of a woman named Hannah, who recognizes Gabriel from a Polaroid Jude shows her. She explains that she and Gabriel were once romantically involved, but he disappeared 15 years ago without a trace. Feeling their trip might be futile, Irene considers heading back, but Hannah persuades them to stay overnight. That evening, Irene hears a suspicious noise upstairs, but is reassured by Hannah that it's nothing. Unknown to the guests, Hannah enters a hidden room where a man named Paul is monitoring everything. They discuss making contact with Franklin after Paul plays a voicemail from him about the coins. Back home, Byron skips Janine's barbecue to focus on his project with Franklin. During a tense conversation, Janine admits she reported Byron's campaign forgery out of a desire for a simpler life, revealing a deep rift between their aspirations. Denise confronts Irene, feeling pushed away, and Irene admits she feels guilty about Michael's past struggles, believing she doesn't deserve Denise's love. Overcome with emotion, Irene apologizes, and they share a heartfelt embrace, understanding each other better through flashbacks of Michael's depression. Meanwhile, Tony finds a video of Jude singing karaoke, which leads Stella to confirm that Jude is the apostate they've been looking for. Tony calls Nick for help in tracing Jude's steps. On another front, Byron and Franklin test the spacesuits they've been working on. Byron explores the alien landscape, excitedly communicating back to Franklin until he goes silent after claiming to have found something incredible. Left alone, Franklin fears the worst, struggling with guilt and concern over Byron's sudden disappearance. Irene takes Denise into the shelter to explain the turmoil she's been experiencing. She shares that after Michael's voluntary death, she struggled to find a reason to continue living and hoped the portal might help her cope with her grief. Irene confesses that her intention was to shield Denise from the portal's complexities, but Jude's arrival has caused events to spiral out of control. Feeling betrayed by the deception, Denise walks away, upset by the revelations. Meanwhile, Tony and Stella encounter Chandra and a sinister man on the shore. The man exchanges gold doubloons worth much more than the $3,000 Chandra demands for information about Jude. After obtaining what he needs, the man abruptly kills Chandra, retrieves the doubloons, and warns that he will ensure Stella remains tough. He then sets Chandra and her car on fire, leaving Tony to witness the horrifying scene from a distance. Jude panics upon realizing the orb is missing from the garden. Meanwhile, Franklin searches for Byron on the observatory deck, but finds no trace of him, leaving both men distressed. Janine, worried, questions Franklin about her husband's whereabouts, but he reassures her without giving specifics. Inside, Jude confronts Franklin about the dangers of their endeavor, explaining that there's nothing but wasteland on the alien planet. Stella and Tony discuss their predicament, with Stella admitting they can't escape the man pursuing them. As the man leads Tony to the York house, noticing dead birds signals they're close, he reveals to Tony that Caleb is her father, not Stella's brother. At the garden, Tony finds Franklin held at gunpoint and forced inside. Meanwhile, Jude thanks Denise for her help at the bar, but their chat is cut short when Stella starts shooting, causing Jude to flee into the woods. Denise returns to the York house and finds herself and her grandparents also at gunpoint. The stranger coerces Irene into revealing the doorway's location, then heads to the shed. Irene comforts a distraught Tony, who doubts their mission and condemns their actions, citing Chandra's death as a stark contradiction to their supposed divine mission. The stranger alters his plans and informs Stella, using the family as leverage to capture Jude, known as the apostate. Upon his arrival, Jude is assaulted by the man, hinted to have been sent by an unidentified woman, though details remain vague. During a scuffle, Franklin manages to overpower the stranger, who is then tasered, bound, and gagged. Stella and Tony, with the captive in tow, leave their old lives behind, driven away with a new bargaining chip. Simultaneously, Jude and Denise decide decide to escape through the doorway to Bangkok, distancing themselves from the chaos. Irene resolves to limit their use of the mysterious doorway, dismissing its once-thought potential, which Franklin accepts with a mix of relief and determination to resolve unfinished business regarding Byron's fate. As Stella and Tony are ambushed and forced off the road by Hannah and her associates, the tension escalates. Hannah confronts Cornelius, the bound stranger, intensifying the conflict. Meanwhile, the couple embarks on another journey to an unknown alien planet. However, Franklin experiences a system failure in his oxygen supply, causing him to lose consciousness. Irene follows him, bravely entering the alien environment without a spacesuit to help him. It turns out the atmosphere of this planet is suitable for human life. She removes her husband's helmet, and together they discover an ancient city beyond the hill. It turns out that guardians of humanity have been living here for about 100,000 years. They are the ones who built hundreds of quantum portals on Earth and many other planets. This is where the first season ends. We were left with a setup for the second season, but unfortunately the series was cancelled. Helly wakes up lying on a table in front of a speaker, from which an unknown voice persistently asks her name. The girl tries to come to her senses and understand what's happening, but the voice doesn't answer her questions, repeating the same thing and insisting that Helly must undergo a short survey. Realizing she can't leave the room, she agrees to the testing, but immediately realizes she knows none of the answers. She can't remember her own name, the state she was born in, or even what her mother looks like. Confused, Helly sits down on the floor, and at that moment, the door to the room opens. In the doorway, she sees the silhouette of a man. Shortly before this, sitting in his car, Mark Scout is having a breakdown, unable to stop crying. Finally, he composes himself, wipes his face and steps outside, then heads to work at the large Lumon Company building as if nothing happened. In the locker room, Scout changes his shoes, watch, and pass, swapping his name tag for a blue square with the company's logo. At the entrance, a guard searches him with a device resembling a metal detector, after which the clerk enters an elevator where he experiences slight dizziness that completely alters his state of mind. Easily navigating the maze of long, pristine corridors, Mark reaches his office designed for 4 clerks, labeled as the Macro Data Refinement Department. Each employee sitting at their personal computer selects random numbers from a multitude displayed on the screen. After a few minutes of work, Scout realizes that only 2 of his colleagues are present today. Pity, his partner and best friend, unexpectedly didn't come to work without notifying anyone. Milchick, the deputy director with a smile, enters the office and invites Mark to come with him. The men arrive at the office of Harmony Coble, the department head, who talks to the employee as if all her words are memorized in advance. She places a speaker in front of her, through which the board of directors participates in the meeting, but Mark hears nothing but strange hissing. Coble informs the clerk that Pity no longer works at the company, which greatly surprises and upsets Mark. No explanation for the news follows, but Mark is appointed the new team lead, replacing his good friend. Immediately after the appointment, Milchick leads Mark to a room with a microphone and monitors, where he will greet a new company employee for the first time. Thus, Mark becomes the voice and silhouette that Helly first encountered. When Scout enters the room with the frightened girl, he calmly starts explaining to her that she is now a Lumen employee. Ignoring Helly's questions and objections, Mark begins to read her important information about the importance of separating work and personal life, until the girl finally loses it, throwing the speaker at the head of the boring man. But Helly fails to leave again and obediently sits down to listen to Mark, who seems to be about to clarify the situation. Unable to bear it any longer, Mark, breaking all instructions, hints to Helly that she needs to ask to leave 3 times, and after that, he finally leads her out of the room, also guiding her through the numerous white corridors. Eventually, the pair arrive at an exit, which states that separated passage is prohibited, and Mark tells the girl she can leave the building. However, when Helly steps out the door, she finds herself in the same place she just left. Mark takes Helly to Harmony's office, who welcomes the new employee and gives her a disc, which should finally clarify everything. On it, the girl sees herself addressing herself, saying that she voluntarily participates in a program to separate consciousness into work and personal, where in each reality she will not remember another one. At 5 p.m. the workday in the offices ends, and the employees leave the building. Coming out of the elevator, none of them remembers where and how they worked, their colleagues, or anything from the day. When Mark almost hits Helly with his car, he doesn't recognize her, just as she doesn't recognize him. On the windshield of the car, the man finds an envelope from the company stating he accidentally fell at work, and as an apology, the company gifts him a certificate to a nice restaurant. Naturally, he also doesn't remember that the bruise on his forehead appeared after interacting with Helly. Returning home, Mark confronts his strange neighbor, Mrs. Selvig, after which he plans to spend the evening as usual in front of the TV. But his pregnant sister Devon arrives and drags him to a dinner party with friends to shake up her relative who, in this reality, cannot get over his wife's death, which led him to agree to the severance procedure to sometimes forget his pain. The company gathers at the table of the strange hosts, who announce a dinner without food, serving only a glass of water. Reckon, Devon's husband, raises the topic of Mark being separated, which causes debates at the table. Devon convinces her brother to stay overnight, and the young people talk late into the night, reminiscing about their childhood and parents. Waking up at night to drink water, Mark Scout sees a strange man in the yard, hiding behind a tree and watching him. The next day, Mark decides to use his certificate and goes to the restaurant, where this same man joins him at the table and demands he hang up the phone during a conversation with his neighbor. The man turns out to be Mark's best friend, his partner Pitty, whom he doesn't remember in this reality. He hands his colleague an envelope with an address where he can be found and short explanations that he managed to remember everything despite the severance operation. Mrs. Selvig waits for her neighbor and apologizes to him for the constant conflicts over the trash bins. The woman caringly asks the man to sleep more and take care of himself. Looking at her, Mark doesn't recognize his boss Harmony Coble, and it's hard to tell if the boss knows they are also neighbors or if she also lives in two personalities. Helly continues her training at Lumen, but the girl still can't grasp what happened, despite Milchick explaining the severance operation to her in detail several times. A new workday begins. Mark tidies up the office, drinks coffee, and while wiping his desk, he focuses on a group photo featuring himself and his colleagues, including Pitty. He gathers identical pictures from all 4 desks and hides them in a closet to avoid being upset over his missing friend. When all the employees gather in the office, Mark explains to Helly what their job entails. She doesn't quite understand the purpose of searching for numbers, but she sits down and stares at the monitor along with the others. During the workday, the girl learns that her other version, the one living outside Lumen, is called an extra, but there's no way to communicate with her as the guard at the entrance checks for any text codes. Milchick gathers the team for a regular game where each participant talks about everything they remember and know, as well as their feelings and emotions. At the meeting, Mark shares his concerns about Pitty, saying he doesn't know if his friend is even alive. Milchick abruptly stops such conversations, reminding everyone that there are no deceased at Lumen as the company takes care of its employees. The team's fun ends with a new group photo, but Helly suddenly announces that she doesn't want to work there and plans to leave. Eventually, the girl realizes that this version of her can't leave the Lumen building at all. Moreover, the rebel ends up in the hands of Mr. Reiner, the head of security, but Mark manages to save his friend, preventing the boss from taking her to the break room. Returning home, Mark plans to read the postcard left by Pitty, but a knock at the door distracts him. Mrs. Selvig decides to visit her neighbor and offer him homemade cookies as an apology. After seeing off the guest, the man falls asleep and only remembers the letter the next morning. Calling in sick to work, he decides to skip a day and drives to the address mentioned in the postcard, finding an abandoned area of the city where he discovers his Fremen in an old greenhouse. One of Mark's colleagues, elderly Irving, falls asleep at his desk and gets a reprimand from the management before being sent to the staff psychologist. There, while waiting for his appointment, he meets Bert, a similarly aged employee from another department. Meeting Pitty, Mark learns about the restroom where employees monotonously apologize for their work misdemeanors. Pitty, who managed to cancel the severance, reveals that something terrible is happening at the company, which is why he is now being hunted. Mark takes his friend home and houses him in his basement. Pitty constantly suffers from headaches and hallucinations, often feeling like he's back at work. When he recovers, he tells Mark that there is no double life, and while they sit there, their other selves continue working in the office. Despite all the details, Mark repeats that he doesn't want to cancel the severance to avoid remembering his deceased wife, but Pitty tells his colleague that he has seen him with red eyes at work because even there he feels his pain, just not remembering what caused it. Reading the news in the morning, Mark announces that Helly's extra refused her resignation from Lumen. Pitty remains in the house alone and hears the door open upstairs. Watching from hiding, he recognizes his former boss in the uninvited guest. Helly constantly tries to pass a note to her extra, but Mark carefully watches the girl, and even when she decides to swallow a pen cap with the message inside, he informs her that the detector will show that too, leading to an unpleasant procedure to extract it. In the corridor, the office employees meet their colleagues, among whom is Bert, Irving's friend. The men exchange a few standard phrases and wink at each other. The entire company goes to the Personality Center to learn more about the creators and managers of Lumen, and Helly again uses the situation to try to escape. This time, Mark fails to cover for his friend, and Mr. Reiner takes the girl to the restroom, where she is forced to repeat words of apology and penance over 1,000 times for her behavior until she repents. Mark sees that the photos from the group photo session have arrived and decides to replace the old ones. Removing the pictures from their frames, he discovers a floor plan drawn by Pitty on one of them. At the same time, Pitty makes it to a night store and collapses there, unconscious. The ambulance is unable to help the man in time. All of this happens in front of Mark, and he quickly rushes home, where he removes all traces of his guest's stay in the basement. Having turned off the lights, he hears his colleague's mobile phone vibrating. Bert visits to give Irving the bags they sew in their department, ahead of the others, and also invites his friend to visit their office, to which Irving happily agrees. Helly returns to the office completely depressed after spending a whole day in the test. Mark tries to reason with his friend and make sure she doesn't provoke conflicts anymore, but finding the photo with the floor plan drawn by Pitty in Mark's desk, Helly accuses her colleague of hypocrisy as he convinces her to accept their situation, yet keeps such things himself. Bert shows Irving paintings in his department and at one point touches his friend's hand, after which Irving embarrassedly runs back to his workstation. Devon's husband leaves a gift on Mark's doorstep, his own book about the meaning of life without severance. However, when Harmony broke into her neighbor's house, she took the book and brought it to work. Returning to the office, Irving noticed the bright cover, but besides the book itself, he was surprised by something else. The first page had a dedication stating the book was intended for Mark Scout. Irving brought his colleague to explain what this all meant, but naturally Mark could not remember his relative or anything from his external life. Not wanting to give up, Helly found a paper cutter in the office and, threatening to harm herself, demanded permission to record a message for her extra. Receiving a response, she realized that it was not so much about the company as about herself. The response from Helly in the outside world was such that she should obediently continue her work at Lumen. Pitty's hidden phone in the basement keeps vibrating, but seeing an unknown number on the screen, Mark hesitates to answer the call. Mark goes to the funeral home to say goodbye to his friend and is surprised to see his neighbor Mrs. Selvig there, who also did not expect to meet him. Both lie to each other about the reason for their visit, but the woman keeps an eye on her neighbor. At the ceremony, Mark meets the deceased friend's ex-wife and daughter, and they immediately guess where the man knew their family head from. Waiting for everyone to be occupied with saying goodbye, Harmony sneaks up to the body and extracts the severance chip from his head. Arriving home, Mark changes his mind about going in and drives to the place where his wife once died. Harmony brings the chip to work and entrusts Milchick to check it in the laboratory to find out how the man managed to cancel the severance. Also, the woman calls Casey, asking the staff psychologist to conduct a session with Mark, as she fears he will also be tempted to cancel the severance. Locked in the bathroom, Mark reads the stolen book about the meaning of life. When it's time for the session, the man obediently comes at the appointed time. The psychologist lights a candle that Harmony stole from a box with personal belongings of Mark's deceased wife. The boss herself watches the conversation through a monitor. Helly, after saying goodbye to her colleagues, goes home. In the elevator, the girl brings a trash bin and a rope, as she can no longer endure the monotonous days without the possibility of liberation. Tying the rope to the elevator ceiling, the girl knocks the trash bin from under her feet. Mark calls the elevator at the end of the workday, and when the doors open, he sees lifeless Helly. Trying to save his colleague, he calls for help, and Mr. Reiner appears immediately, ordering Mark to quickly get into the elevator to avoid additional witnesses. Coming to work the next day, the first thing Mark remembers is the incident with Helly. Stepping onto the floor, he is immediately taken in by Harmony and Milchick, who reprimand the department head for not keeping an eye on his employee. Harmony gives Pitty's chip to Reiner and instructs him to find out who and how managed to hack it and restore the consciousness of the separated. The man asks if the head informed the board of directors about what happened to Helly, but Harmony avoids answering. Locked in the bathroom, Mark continues reading the stolen book, which increasingly inspires him. After work, the guy takes his things from the locker and sees many voice messages from Rickon, informing that Devon will soon give birth and everyone expects the brother to be with her. Mark heads straight to the maternity cottage settlement to support his relative. In a conversation with Rickon, he learns about the book he left on his porch as a surprise, but it never reached its owner. Devon steps out of the cottage to find coffee and meets another pregnant woman. The future mothers talk and discuss their unborn children, but Devon has to return as her contractions intensify. Comforting his sister, Mark shares his suspicions about Lumen and his intention to find out what the company is up to. Psychologist Miss Casey comes to the office tasked with monitoring Helly and reporting any signs of melancholy and sadness to the management. Despite the specialist's surveillance, Mark manages to take his colleague to another wing to talk without eavesdroppers. Wandering the corridors, the pair find a department where goats are raised, which greatly surprises them. This further confirms that none of the separated employees even suspect what the company is working on. Irving meets with Bert in the conference room, but their conversation is immediately interrupted by Dylan, who forbids his co-worker from interacting with an employee from another department. Miss Casey finds the runaways and brings them back to the office, watched by Harmony through a monitor. Mark explains their escape as a health walk he took his colleague on. At home, the head receives a call from Reiner, informing her that they have tracked the source of the hack on Pitty's chip. According to the security officer, it could only have been done by one person, former Lumen employee, Gabby. Mark takes out his friend's phone from the box and sees that the unknown number is still calling. After giving birth, Devon goes for a walk in the park with her baby and sees the same woman she met in the maternity cottage. Waving at her and not receiving a response, the young mother decides to approach, but it becomes clear that her friend does not remember her at all. Furthermore, the baby she holds is named differently than she introduced him in their conversation, and when asked why the name was changed, the woman cannot answer, as if she doesn't understand the topic at all. The 4 employees of the Macro Data Refinement Department gather in the cafeteria, and Mark and Helly suggest to their colleagues that they explore the building and meet other departments. However, the timid and law-abiding Irving and Dylan do not approve of such behavior. Harmony summons Mark and informs him that Miss Casey has been punished and sent to the restroom for not keeping an eye on Helly on the day Mark took her out of the office. The 4 decide to meet Bert's department and find out what they do. While the colleagues get acquainted, Dylan explores the unfamiliar office and finds interesting cards. He manages to slip one into his pocket before an unhappy Milchick arrives to return the curious clerks to their workplace. Back in the office, they are greeted by Harmony. After solemnly singing the Lumen anthem, the head sends Mark to the restroom, where he meets an exhausted Casey. Devon looks for a lactation consultant, and her advertisement is answered by an experienced nurse. When she arrives at the home of the young parents, the woman recognizes her as her brother's neighbor, Mrs. Selbig. As soon as the helper takes the baby girl in her arms and she stops crying, the couple trusts her, and Devon doesn't question how Selbig ended up there. A boy sits in front of the TV with cartoons, closing his eyes and counting to 1,000, starting to lose count. Dylan sits in the locker room not understanding where he is, and Milchick appears, demanding to know where the clerk hid the card from the neighboring department. Suddenly, a boy bursts into the closet and jumps on Dylan's neck, calling him Dad. The man realizes that his work consciousness has been transferred to the life of his extra, and this is what his life outside Lumen looks like. Waking up at night, Mark turns on Pitty's phone and answers the call. A woman's voice understands who she is talking to and arranges a meeting. Arriving at the college, Mark meets Gabby. She was the one who installed chips in all the separated, and now she's trying to fix the situation. During the conversation, Reiner appears out of nowhere, but the woman deals with him, explaining that he poses a threat to everyone trying to pull the separated out. Gabby sends Mark home and promises to contact him to help him retrieve his another personality that is constantly at Lumen. She hands the clerk Reiner's pass, which is untraceable and opens any door, and instructs him to take it to work, hoping that the other Mark will understand how to use it. Arriving at work, Dylan inquires Milchick about what happened and who the boy was who called him Dad. The man can't think of anything else, realizing he has a different life going on somewhere else. The supervisor tries to gloss over the question, and knowing Dylan's love for rewards and incentives, promises him special bonuses, explaining that it was a random activation that went a little off plan. The employees learn that they are now working under lock and key to prevent wandering the corridors and interacting with colleagues from other departments. Harmony visits Devon's house daily as a consultant, but in reality, she tries to gather more information about Mark. Over a cup of tea, she finally learns that the man has questions and doubts about his job and already regrets having separated. Milchick comes to the office and announces a 5-minute music and dance event to keep the team's spirits up. During the dance, Mark discovers a pass in his pocket, but realizes it's probably a handover from his extra, so he hides it back to use at a more opportune moment. The music break abruptly ends as Dylan attacks Milchick, demanding he tell him about the son he accidentally saw during the switch. The clerk tells his colleagues about his awakening and how he saw his son, and now he wants to cancel the severance. Helly realizes there is some way to awaken and only needs to find out the details to return to normal life. Of the four, only Irving disagrees with breaking the community's rules, also trying to dissuade his friends. Using Reiner's card, the group exits into the corridor, but Irving leaves his friends and heads to the neighboring department to find out what happened to his friend Bert. Mark and Helly decide not to waste time and find the control point, which can manage all Lumen employees. Taking the manual with them, the pair returns to the office to avoid being caught by Harmony. Irving arrives at the other department and finds himself at a party celebrating Bert's retirement. Horrified, he realizes he will never see his friend again and tries to explain that the only way to leave Lumen is for one reason, but everyone pretends not to hear his arguments. Dylan studies the instructions, and the employees find out that not everyone can switch. Someone has to manage the process from inside. The guy volunteers to do this so that everyone else can escape to the outside world and find those who can help them cancel the severance. Returning to his department, Irving tells his friends that he will look for a way out with them, wishing to erase Lumen from existence. Irving's extra sits on a bench in the park with his pet. Returning home, the man approaches the easel and paints a picture using only black colors. Dozens of absolutely identical black paintings already stand against the walls. Harmony calls Mark and schedules his last session with Mrs. Casey, supposedly to close the quarter. In the office, the man learns that the psychologist is working her last day and is being replaced by another specialist. The employees await Dylan's waffle party, planning to use this time for the switch. Trying to act as calm as possible, they rehearse their escape plan. The board of directors learns about the incident with Helly in the elevator and suspends Harmony from managing the company. Using the stolen pass, Mark sends his friends outside one by one, leaving himself for last. Dylan heads to the waffle party, then sneaks away to the control center to start the operation. Each employee, once in the outside world, must carefully study their extra's life and figure out who in their circle they can ask for help. Harmony, devastated by her dismissal after so many years of loyal service, is at home when the doorbell rings. Resuming her disguise as Mrs. Selvig, she opens the door to find Mark, who inquires if she'll attend the event Devon and Rickon are organizing for their book release. Initially citing poor health, Mrs. Selvig eventually agrees to attend, saying she'll arrive a bit later. When she arrives at the party, she tries to stick close to Mark to learn why he wants to leave Lumen. Dylan breaks into the control room and locks himself in, preparing to launch his friends. Reaching the controls, he pulls the levers and the process begins. Finding himself in Devon's house, Mark's extra doesn't recognize anyone. The same happens with Irving and Helly. Irving finds himself at an easel with a black canvas, while Helly is at a reception among influential people. After learning from the guest that Devon is his sister, Mark tries to speak with her alone for help, but he can't manage it due to the crowd and commotion in the house. Exploring his apartment, Irving realizes he's alone except for his dog. He finds military awards and a locked chest containing items and photos of his son who died in the war. Helly's situation is the most complex. While examining the hall, she realizes she's not just a participant in the severance program, but a direct descendant of Lumen's founders, the daughter of the current company owner. Her extra is supposed to give a speech today about the benefits of having two entities and not wasting personal life on work. At the bottom of the chest, Irving finds strange records and a map with many marks. It becomes clear his extra has long been trying to unravel Lumen's mystery. Gathering everything, he finds car keys and plans to drive to Bert, whose name he found marked on the map. Guests at Devon's house attentively listen to Rickon, but Mark is preoccupied with finding help. Noticing his boss, he doesn't immediately realize she shouldn't be there. Addressing Harmony by her last name, he inadvertently reveals himself and his plan. In a hurry, he runs to his sister, leaving Harmony in confusion. Devon hands the baby over to the feeding assistant and finally makes time for her brother, who tells her that it's actually another person, and he urgently needs help to get out of the trap. The woman doesn't fully understand what's happening, but she tells Mark that her brother decided to have surgery, unable to cope with the pain of his wife Gemma's death. Helly, watching her own interview on huge screens advocating the benefits of severance, feels dizzy and hides in the restroom, where her father finds her and expects a vibrant and emotional performance. Mark asks his sister about his boss from Lumen being at her party, and based on Devon's description, realizes she has entrusted her child to a terrifying woman. Rushing out of the room, Devon begins searching for her daughter but finds neither the nanny, her car, nor the girl. Eventually, a guest finds the baby carrier in an empty room. Meanwhile, Harmony races to Lumen, simultaneously calling Milchick to inform him of the emergency. The three employees have escaped to the outside world. Milchick rushes to the control room, trying to negotiate with Dylan to open the door. Realizing that bonuses and incentives won't work in this situation, the supervisor promises to tell him not only about the boy from the closet, but also about his two children. Dylan remains steadfast, but Milchick understands he needs to enter the room, so he cuts the belt Dylan used to lock himself in. Arriving at the specified address, Irving sees his friend from the neighboring department relaxing with a companion in his own home. Helly prepares to go on stage, intending to tell everyone the truth. Mark, left alone in the room, decides to look at family photos, and on one of them, he sees himself with his deceased wife. To his horror, it turns out to be Mrs. Casey. Harmony manages to arrive at the gala event and tells Helly she knows everything. Unfazed, Helly whispers her plans to her boss and takes the stage, despite threats that she will make her friends suffer. Irving decides to step out of the car and knocks on Bert's door to tell him the truth about working at Lumen. Mark tells his sister that his wife is alive and he knows where to find her, while Helly starts speaking from the stage, revealing that all the sweet stories about severance are pure lies and that extras suffer, trapped. At that moment, Milchick cuts the belt, bursts into the control room, and pushes Dylan away from the levers. All the escapees return their extras consciousness of personal life. This concludes the first season. Clearly, many questions remain unanswered. Most importantly, what exactly do the employees at Lumen Company do? Hopefully, we will get the answers in the second season, set to release in 2024. The movie begins by introducing us to the young protagonist, Vesper, who lives in a dystopian world sharply divided between the privileged elites and the struggling masses. The elite reside in secure, enclosed cities known as citadels, while the rest of humanity faces the challenges of survival in harsh conditions. In this world, the key to sustenance is unique seeds provided by the citadels. These seeds are genetically coded to yield just a single harvest, ensuring a constant dependency on the citadels for more. Vesper, amidst her struggle for survival in this harsh environment, shares her existence with her paralyzed father, Darius, a former army serviceman. Ingeniously, Darius's consciousness has been transferred into a drone, enabling him to accompany and communicate with his daughter as she navigates their dangerous world. Vesper is not only resourceful and brave, venturing out daily to forage, but she also possesses a keen understanding of biology and biohacking. However, their lives take a dramatic turn when Vesper returns home one afternoon to discover they've been robbed. The generator powering their home, including the critical machine sustaining Darius, has been sabotaged. Faced with no other choice to save her father, Vesper sets out to seek help from a neighboring farm. Upon arrival at the farm, Vesper encounters a troubling scene. The farm faces its own challenges with a jug, a genetically engineered human designed for labor, but devoid of intelligence. The jug has been injured, rendering it useless, and Jonas, the farm's leader and Darius's brother, instructs a young boy to kill it. After witnessing this unsettling event, Vesper approaches Jonas with a request for bacteria to restore their generator. In exchange, she offers a blood donation, a valuable commodity used by Jonas to trade for seeds from the citadels. Jonas expresses a desire for her to join their community, offering to care for her father as well. Vesper, however, is deeply unsettled by Jonas's intentions. She suspects that Jonas wants to use her as a breeder, a role she strongly rejects. After completing her blood donation, Vesper faces a dire situation when Jonas refuses to immediately provide the bacteria she needs in exchange. He explains that he must first sell the blood, a process that will take several days, time her father Darius does not have. In desperation and anger, Vesper attempts to reclaim her blood, only to be caught and forcefully expelled from the farm by Jonas. Undeterred, Vesper returns to the farm, exploiting a secret entry point known only to her. Vesper stealthily enters Jonas's lab and retrieves the bacteria she is owed. While there, she also manages to take some seeds acquired from the Citadel. As Vesper heads home, she promptly repairs the generator and begins experimenting with the stolen seeds, hoping to unlock their fertility. In the forest, Vesper stumbles upon Camellia, a woman from the Citadel, lying unconscious yet alive, with plants feeding off of her. Vesper acts quickly, clearing the plants and bringing Camellia back to their home, where she treats her wounds. Camellia then reveals that she was in the crashed glider Vesper had seen and is now desperately searching for her father, who is with her. Although not fully recovered, Camellia promises a reward for their help. Vesper agrees to assist in the search, despite Darius's objections. The following morning, Vesper sets out on her mission and soon locates the crashed glider, finding Camellia's father Elias inside. However, she's not alone in this discovery. Jonas and a group of survivalists also converge on the crash site. Jonas, cold and indifferent to Elias's pleas, decides to end his life simply because he is from the Citadel. When Vesper attempts to intervene, Jonas dismissively shoves her aside. He also uncovers a woman's scarf in the glider, deducing that another passenger, Camellia, needs to be found. Back home, Darius suggests informing the Citadel of the situation before Camellia takes any drastic action or Jonas finds her. However, the only way to communicate with the Citadel is through a transceiver located at Jonas's house. Vesper reluctantly agrees to the plan, lying to Camellia that her search was fruitless, but promising to continue the next day. After a while, Camellia earns Vesper's trust. Vesper then decides to reveal her secret greenhouse. This greenhouse is a testament to Vesper's ingenuity, housing a variety of bioengineered plants, each with unique abilities and characteristics. Vesper takes pride in her creations, but still hopes to develop a plant capable of producing edible seeds. While Vesper tends to her plants, Darius quietly confides in Camellia. He admits he knows they can never gain access to a Citadel, but implores her to be kind, as Vesper's dream of reaching the Citadel means everything to her. Later, Vesper questions why they are excluded from the Citadel, to which Camellia explains the leadership's fear of resource scarcity. Vesper suggests they could take on the worst jobs, but Camellia points out the Citadel's preference for control. Unlike humans, the genetically engineered laborers, or jugs, don't resist. That evening, they share a musical moment, with Vesper singing while Camellia plays her mother's old instrument. The next day, Vesper once again sneaks into Jonas's house to use the transceiver. This time, however, Jonas spots Darius's drone and seizes it. While pretending to repair the drone, Jonas confronts Vesper about the missing seeds and the unidentified passenger, expressing his hatred for liars, especially within his own family. Vesper, refusing to admit anything, snatches the drone and flees, only to find it can't fly and crashes. In her attempt to recover the drone, Vesper stumbles upon a grim sight: the body of Jonas's assistant, who helped here before, left to die under a tree. Before she can process whether he was killed for aiding her, Jonas's followers apprehend her. They forcefully mark her hand with a seal, symbolizing her as Jonas's property. Distraught and overwhelmed, Vesper returns home, where Camellia immediately offers comfort. Guilt-ridden by her own deceit, Vesper breaks down and confesses to Camellia that Elias is dead. In a moment of stark revelation, Vesper decides to show Camellia the truth by taking her to see her father Elias's body, now tragically floating in the river. The sight overwhelms Camellia, leading to an intense emotional breakdown. She clings desperately to her father in grief, forcing Vesper to intervene and pull her from the river. During this intense moment, Vesper notices an unusual scar on Camelia's back that reacts peculiarly to her touch. This discovery leads to a shocking truth. truth. Camellia is not a human, but a highly advanced Jug, a creation of Elias who was expelled from the Citadel for creating an intelligent slave. Camellia confesses her deception. She had been on the run and never had the capability to get Vesper and Darius into the Citadel. Angered by this betrayal, Vesper confronts Camellia physically before they return home. Once there, Vesper coldly tells Camellia to leave after she cleans up. Meanwhile, Vesper repairs the drone and shares the day's events with Darius. Darius, understanding the complex situation, urges Vesper to be more compassionate towards Camellia, explaining that Jugs are bound to their programming and have no real choice in their actions. At the same time, Camellia, grappling with her lost purpose and fearing capture by the Citadel, contemplates ending her life. However, Vesper, influenced by her father's words, intervenes just in time. Realizing Camellia's potential contribution to her research, Vesper proposes to use a sample of Camellia's cells. The process proves challenging, as Camellia's cells are secured just like the Citadel's seeds. In an attempt to ease Vesper's frustration, Camellia plays music. Miraculously, the music unlocks Camellia's cells, allowing Vesper to modify the Citadel seeds successfully, creating a sustainable food source. And all it took was a little nickelback. Needing more supplies for further research, Vesper briefly leaves for the old lab with the drone. During her absence, Camellia stays to watch over Darius, which leads to a dangerous encounter when Jonas arrives. Initially, Camellia tries to feign innocence, but Jonas sees through her act and threatens Darius's life. Camellia agrees to go with Jonas without resistance. However, Jonas soon discovers the mark on her back, identifying her as a Jug, and attempts to reprogram her to obey him. Vesper returns just in time, and a fierce struggle ensues, with Vesper, the drone, and Camellia fighting against Jonas. They manage to overpower him, but Vesper refuses to kill him. Instead, she strikes a deal. She will share the secret of the fertile seeds with Jonas if he agrees not to alert the Citadel. Despite Jonas's apparent agreement, he betrays them by contacting the Citadel and revealing Camellia's location. As night falls and Vesper completes her work on the seeds, their moment of triumph is cut short. Darius's drone detects an external threat, signaling the Citadel's approach. A weird organism invades their home, releasing a toxic substance. Darius, with his military background, quickly recognizes the danger and instructs Vesper and Camellia not to breathe until the threat subsides. Camellia, feeling responsible for the imminent danger, offers to surrender herself to protect Vesper and Darius. However, Darius refuses to let her sacrifice herself, knowing the Citadel will pursue Vesper regardless. Instead, he devises a plan to distract the soldiers, giving Vesper and Camellia a chance to escape. Vesper is initially reluctant to leave her father behind in the face of the impending threat from the Citadel's soldiers. However, Darius persuades her to take cover nearby, assuring her that he will handle the situation. He plans to tell the soldiers that there is no Jug present, drawing on his experience as a former army man to communicate effectively with them. As the soldiers approach, their first stop is Jonas's farm, where they eliminate him and his group. Meanwhile, Vesper and Camellia take painstaking efforts to make Darius's home appear abandoned. They cover everything up and take the valuable, unlocked seeds with them as they hide in the forest. Unbeknownst to Vesper, her father's actual plan is to sacrifice himself by self-destructing the drone, hoping to take the soldiers down with him. From their hiding spot in the forest, Vesper witnesses the explosion and, driven by desperation, tries to rush back to aid her father. Camellia, recognizing the danger of this action, stops her, reminding her that it's too late to do anything for Darius. Their situation worsens when two soldiers, having survived the explosion, start pursuing them. Vesper leads Camellia through a swamp, aware that it is filled with dangerous plants that could potentially eliminate their pursuers. Their tactic proves effective, as the first soldier falls victim to one of these lethal plants. The second soldier, however, learns from his comrade's fate and cautiously avoids the same trap. Vesper and Camellia, in an attempt to remain undetected, crawl on their knees and hide behind bushes. Unfortunately, another plant betrays their position with a noise, alerting the soldier to their location. Facing imminent danger, Vesper and Camellia decide to take the offensive. They attack the soldier, seize his weapon, and manage to force him into the deadly plant's trapping zone, resulting in his death. The distant sound of approaching gliders signals more danger. Realizing that the Citadel will never cease their pursuit as long as she is with Vesper, Camellia makes a difficult decision. She understands that Vesper and the precious seeds will always be in danger as long as she remains. Despite Vesper's protests, Camellia gently puts her to sleep and conceals her under fallen leaves before surrendering to the soldiers. The next morning, Vesper awakens to find her home reduced to ashes. She plants some of the unlocked seeds in the remnants of her old garden, a symbol of hope and renewal. In the aftermath, she encounters a group of children who survived the attack on Jonas's farm. Together, they decide to follow the mysterious people that wander around, seeking to uncover their destination. Their journey leads them to a towering structure constructed by these people. Driven by a sense of purpose, Vesper climbs to the top of the tower. There, she releases the seeds from her hand, allowing the wind to carry them to various corners of the land. This symbolic act represents her hope that the seeds will grow and multiply, providing sustenance for all. The movie concludes on this note, leaving a lasting impression of resilience and the enduring power of hope. The movie begins with scenes of a mysterious alien flying through space in a spacesuit at the speed of light towards Earth to save his planet and landing somewhere in New Mexico. After crashing, the alien takes on a human form and, while naked, sneaks onto someone's property, prompting the owner to call the police. When the police arrive, they find a man with a water hose in his mouth, responding to questions with disjointed words in broken English. At the station, the man claims he is from another world on a mission, having just learned the language. He asks for water and then reads a name on an officer's patch, announcing his name is Faraday. Asked who can pick him up from the station, he names Justin Falls. Meanwhile, Justin is preparing for another shift at a toxic waste disposal facility. Once a promising scientist, she now takes care of her sick father and raises a young daughter. Receiving a call from the station, she goes there, but does not recognize the man. Faraday then starts quoting her scientific work and confesses he needs her for his mission. Puzzled but willing, she vouches for the strange man. They release him, and his first stop is a pawn shop where he vomits a large amount of gold rings. After getting money, he buys an antique device to determine his next direction. Faraday stuffs the bills in his pockets, but fails to notice them flying away. Some guys in a passing car get out to rob him. Justin sees this and tries to help Faraday, but the robbers knock a weapon from her hands. Faraday then grabs the gun and fires randomly, scaring the thugs. Cursing herself, Justin puts Faraday in her car, and he speaks again about their joint mission, giving coordinates for a message reception. Needing money, she agrees. Soon they stop at a gas station where Faraday finds water containers and joyfully immerses himself into them. He then sees a horse corral and confuses Justin by saying that on his planet, horses are predators. On the road, they stop at a cafe where Justin tries teaching Faraday decent behavior, eventually labeling him autistic. Faraday then surprises her by writing a futuristic equation on a napkin taught by Thomas Newton, founder of World Enterprises. On Antea, Faraday's planet, two races exist: Newton's race, the knowers, who invent and manage, and Faraday's race, the drones, who obediently follow orders. They drive on, and Faraday reveals his world is dying, and Earth doesn't have much time left either. Tired of his seemingly delusional talk, Justin drops him off and leaves. Faraday walks towards his destination and soon sees a huge black cloud forming a tornado. Justin, also seeing this, turns back to find Faraday. When he finds himself in the eye of this storm, teleported to a forest where he meets Thomas Newton, who is also an alien from Antea. Newton has learned to create spaces only certain beings can enter. He warns Faraday to stay away, as agents are hunting him. In response, Faraday reproaches the teacher because all of Antea was waiting for his return with water. But time passed, and there were fewer and fewer Anteans left. They considered Newton a traitor and even decided to erase his name from memory. But Faraday believes him. Then, Newton advises Faraday to introduce a virus into Antea, which he calls humans, and most importantly, to see everything through the eyes of a human, but not to get attached to earthly life. He sets Faraday a goal: reclaim the company taken from him, because there lies the key to salvation, but he will need Justin's help. Meanwhile, the woman tries to take shelter from the hurricane in her car. Suddenly, everything calms down, and she sees Faraday in front of the car, looking intimidating and repeating only one word: Origin. Terrified, Justin drives away. Faraday sets off on foot and soon reaches the familiar cafe. The waitress recognizes him, offers water, and finds out for him that Origin is a corporation in Seattle. Meanwhile, CIA agent Clay receives a dinner invitation from his boss and foster mother Finch. He recently made a mistake resulting in a child's death, and now only success in a new case can save his job. Finch tells him about the strange tornado, which was actually a dialogue in the form of signals sent and received from space, something that last happened 40 years ago. Back then, Dr. Papel, who now lives in Alaska, was involved. Clay must go there and find out everything he can. At the same time, Faraday takes a taxi to the airport and, realizing he needs documents for the flight, steals them from the driver. But upon entering the terminal, he suddenly feels very ill. The radiation from the passenger and luggage scanning systems affect him. He vomits a large amount of water and loses consciousness. Justin is called by the police to pick up Faraday, who is now in her jurisdiction. She arrives to find him pleading to be taken to Seattle, as the tornado was a message. She finally believes he is an alien. Faraday explains that the Origin Corporation has blueprints for a device that can save Antea. As a nuclear fusion expert, she can help him build it. Justin takes Faraday home and introduces him to her family. He is baffled by why people keep useless old people instead of disposing of them. At home, Justin's father Josiah plays his favorite jazz, which delights Faraday. Meanwhile, CIA agent Clay makes his way to Alaska and finds Papel's house, but he is immediately struck on the head and loses consciousness. The young man comes to, tied to a chair with his mouth taped shut. The mad old man cuts him to make sure he is human. Papel is convinced the agent came for the film. He starts to recall Newton, whom he turned into a psychopath. Then, Clay manages to free himself, but the old man grabs a rifle and, threatening the agent, suddenly shoots himself. At the same time, Faraday, sitting at a table, watches the traditional prayer in confusion, not understanding who Josiah is talking to. Josiah regrets his daughter abandoning her scientific work. Faraday cannot understand why she wastes her potential on a worthless old man. An upset Justin takes her daughter to a neighbor. Faraday stays with Josiah. He looks at the old man and then reaches out to him. Justin sees flashing lights and runs to the house, finding Josiah standing on his feet while Faraday convulses in a corner, saying they can now go to Seattle. Father and daughter rush to him and find the alien completely dehydrated. They carry him to the bathroom where he drinks greedily. Then he suddenly falls. A black substance emerges from him, rises into the air, and disappears into the ventilation. After that, Faraday fully recovers. In the morning, Josiah, for the first time in years, gets himself ready and insists his daughter take Faraday to Seattle, gifting him a suit and a hat. On the road, Faraday explains they need to infiltrate the Origin Corporation's vault and find Newton's 10th project. The woman is skeptical, so Faraday asks to stop the car, approaches a long broken oil derrick, extracts a glowing sphere from himself, and inserts it into the machine's engine. The oil derrick starts working, and the alien explains that it is quantum synthesis, which can operate for hundreds of years. He used this energy to travel to Earth. Newton's project will provide the necessary energy, restore Antaea's core, and enable the recreation of water. Earth is currently on the same path, and Justin was very close to solving the mystery. Meanwhile, in Alaska, Clay finds an old projector and a film reel showing an experiment on Newton, where his face was removed. The shocked agent burns down the old psychiatrist's house. Faraday and Justin stop at a hotel for the night. The alien lies on the water in the pool, looking at the stars, and predicts Earth's imminent doom. Then, Justin sets a condition. She will help achieve the goal, but the device's blueprints must remain on Earth. Faraday agrees and informs her that they need to find Hutch. It turns out Hutch is the dismissed brother of the Origin Corporation's manager. However, seeing Faraday's calculations on a napkin and hearing Newton's name, he refuses to have anything to do with them. Clay meets with Finch. He has traced Newton's entire path. The US government practically stripped Newton, who amassed a fortune and founded Origin, of everything, replacing him with their own person while torturing the alien himself. Newton then disappeared after speaking about the project. Now, another similar entity has appeared. Finch reminds him of the case's danger, but agrees to assign him the investigation, providing him with an analyst, Elizabeth. At that moment, Hutch finally comes to Justin and Faraday. He recalls Newton's projects and tries to convey to the pair what will happen if quantum energy is used on Earth. It would mean the death of the entire energy system, the ruin of oligarchs, and the closure of power stations. Who would let them do such a thing? Clay meets Elizabeth, who intercepted the last signal. Her file states she betrayed her own family. She reminds him of the child who died because of him. Clay realizes they are a team and orders her to track down the alien from the tornado. Hutch informs them that Origin is in London, but his relationship with his sister is very poor. Faraday suggests a demonstration of his quantum prototype. Hutch arranges a private plane to London. However, during the flight, Faraday's face suddenly starts to melt. Hutch barely manages to calm the stewardess, who is in shock after witnessing it. They arrive and infiltrate a club where scientific proposals are being presented. Faraday listens to a young scientist's presentation, but suddenly goes to the board and writes the correct formula. When questioned by the committee, he announces he came to demonstrate quantum synthesis processes. Seeing disbelief, he takes at the sphere, and instantly, all of London's electricity cuts off and then turns back on. The next day, the news goes global. Justin asks her father to come to London with her daughter Molly. Hutch receives numerous congratulations. Faraday is outraged by Earthling's wastefulness and the fact that there is nothing about his teacher Newton on the internet, as if his life was simply erased. Hutch decides to go to his sister's estate uninvited. Elizabeth tracks them and reports to Clay, showing him Faraday's airport photo. She is sure he is an alien. She also obtained information about a Mary, who was Newton's friend. Clay heads to the monastery clinic where she works. Faraday's team arrives at Hutch's sister's estate. Justin talks about the prototype that can light a city for almost a year using just a liter of water. Edie opposes, but then Faraday mentions Newton's name. Edie's son admits he has music recorded by the scientist on an old device and leads Faraday to his grandfather's study. At the same time, Clay arrives at the monastery clinic and meets Mary. Meanwhile, Edie's consultants bombard Justin with questions, making her feel unwell. During this time, Faraday receives a musical sphere and upon playing it, hears strange sounds. In the monastery, Mary recalls that Newton told her about his wife and begs Clay to protect the alien, as he is a miracle. Faraday realizes that the sphere contains Newton's farewell to his wife. It is so touching that tears well up in the alien's eyes, although he does not know what they are, and he throws the sphere away. Antaeans understand each other, but do not feel. Faraday wonders how humans can live like this. Meanwhile, Clay visits Edie and reminds her that her father was a CIA front. Therefore, she will have to make a deal with Faraday, who will build the required machine. Edie finds herself having to agree, but in retaliation, she tells everyone that Justin killed her assistant in an attempt to unlock quantum energy. The young man received a lethal dose of radiation because she didn't wait for safety confirmation. However, Faraday declares that he will work only with Justin. Edie is forced to sign the agreement. Justin admits that the deceased young man was the father of her daughter, Molly. Later, Faraday recalls saying goodbye to his family, his wife, and 2 children, and promising to return. He urges Justin to hurry, but she is determined to first bring her family here. Hutch and Faraday arrive at the research center, where all materials related to Newton's project are brought. Simultaneously, Clay's team sets up their laboratory, where they can monitor Faraday's work. He has become a real Steve Jobs, demanding high results from employees. Soon, his team creates a construction that will shield the device from electromagnetic fields. Immediately, all of Clay's equipment shuts down. Faraday suddenly realizes something is wrong. Newton planned to obtain energy from tritium, but its decay period is too short. It seems Newton was creating nonsense. Faraday simply won't have time to save the planet. While pondering this, an elderly lady suddenly addresses him, confessing she worked with Newton. Her name is Watt, and she is ready to help Faraday. Meanwhile, Justin brings her family to London and arrives at the laboratory to organize things. Josiah suddenly starts noticing changes in himself. He foresees an accident and pulls his granddaughter Molly off the road in time. In the evening, Faraday admits he is getting nowhere. He finds more and more differences between Antaea and Earth. Here, people rarely follow instructions. He leaves the house, remembering his planet and flight, and again encounters Watt. She leads him somewhere, confessing she knows he is a drone. Josiah gives his daughter the materials he saved from her work. Watt tells Faraday that Earth and Antea once collided in space, after which Earth absorbed part of Antea, but Antea also received a piece of Earth, awakening the human within some Anteans. The pair heads to the laboratory, where Watt reminds him of Newton's words about the virus, humans, which drone Faraday did not hear. Therefore, his children are dying now. Angered, Faraday pushes the woman away, and she starts destroying everything around. Elizabeth, watching all of this, is puzzled, as Faraday is absolutely alone in this laboratory. Then, the alien realizes the woman is just his imagination, suggesting what to do next. He goes to Justin because he has deciphered the project. Justin shows him her equation, where she replaced tritium with another substance. Friends, the continuation of the story is now before you on the screen. A man discovers a loophole in the universe and travels back in time to retrieve his wife and job, while also finding out the winning lottery numbers to become wealthy. I think you and I can do this together the right way. 2016. Attorney Patrick Landry introduces his partner, Philip Grimmer, to Evelyn's sister. Love at first sight happens, although the girl warns of her upcoming departure to Prague and asks not to get attached. 6 years later, the couple wakes up in the same bed. Phil immediately rushes to his laptop while Ev answers a call from her mother, who invites them to dinner for her birthday. However, Phil, as always, doesn't listen to his wife. His mind is preoccupied with work issues. Realizing this, the woman allows her husband not to go with her and asks him to repeat it on camera. Later, Philip argues with the builders who can't seem to finish the renovation of their house. The foreman complains about the absence of the homeowner's brother Andy, whom they hired at his request, and irritated Phil promises to find another carpenter. On the way to work, Phil justifies Andy in every way, ignoring his wife's request to turn left, which leads to a traffic jam. Ev says she's taking the subway because she needs to go somewhere else. Philip, on the other hand, goes to his brother, who overslept. The crucial thing is that he hasn't consumed alcohol, which is strictly forbidden for him because he's an alcoholic. After sending his brother to work, Phil rushes to the company, as it's an important day for them. He texts his wife, hoping she's already there, but she asks for a conversation which her husband once again doesn't hear. Later, they all gather at the same table because they work for the same company they own. Patrick complains about the lack of a secretary in their team, so Ev has to work much more. Still, Phil reminds them that today they will make a deal with Kiss Company, and money won't be a problem anymore. In the evening, Patrick presents his part of the presentation, while Phil works on his own. Finally, after finishing everything, the man goes home, only to find the bedroom painted blue and his wife asleep. In the morning, Ev wakes him up with a question about the bedroom color. However, her husband refuses to discuss this trivial matter and rushes to meet with representatives of the Kiss Company, which specializes in building mines for valuable minerals. The lawyers are convinced that they are the best to mediate with the locals who oppose the project. Afterward, Phil rushes home with champagne to celebrate their success with his wife, but Ev meets him with her things packed, as she intends to leave him. She reminds him of numerous instances when he ignored her interests and departs. Phil roams around the house, not knowing what to do, but then remembers the invitation from his mother-in-law and goes to Evelyn's parents' home. However, the woman refuses to talk to him, and to prevent a scandal, Patrick takes his friend to a bar. He confesses that he knew about his sister's intentions but kept quiet because of a contract. Disheartened, Phil heads to the restroom, where he stumbles upon an ad inviting him to use Plan B and correct his mistakes. All evening, he tries to find his wife, but she is nowhere to be found, and she doesn't answer his calls. The man dials the agency's number and, not entirely sure what he's doing, names the date of the day he'd like to return to. Specifically, yesterday morning. In the morning, Phil wakes up to find Andy working in his living room. Due to the events of the previous day, his head isn't functioning well, and he is surprised to read a message from Plan B. Then, there's a knock on the door, and two identical guys appear on the doorstep, grabbing Phil and dragging him into a van parked outside. After this, he wakes up 2 days earlier. Bewildered, Phil, without allowing his wife to finish, agrees to go to her mother's birthday party, which astonishes Evelyn. He also requests the foreman to find a replacement for his brother. On the way, stuck in traffic again, he follows his wife and discovers her at a clinic, where a surprised Ev mentions a delay. Phil doesn't understand why she didn't tell him earlier, but she suggests discussing it later. He waits for her in the car, where his wife admits she considered their relationship over. Her husband pleads for another chance and asks her to remind him what color she wanted for the bedroom. He then calls the foreman, who has already painted the walls blue, orders him to stop, and later fires Andy. At work, Phil takes on all of Ev's extra work, which leaves him with no time to complete his part of the presentation. While his wife goes to meet a friend, he rushes home and paints the walls in her favorite color. Catching him in the act, Evelyn is surprised, but counts it as an effort. Furthermore, he apologizes for her having to do something she doesn't love, despite always dreaming of being a musician. He suggests she resume playing the cello. The woman is completely taken aback. In the morning, Phil confesses that he hasn't finished his part of the presentation. Patrick tries to fix the situation, but Kiss refuses to sign a contract with the lawyers. Later, the family goes to a formal dinner, where Phil raises a toast to the family. Patrick admits that he had a relationship with one of the Kiss executives for the sake of the contract, even though he has a family, and they still have a chance. On the way home, Ev thanks her husband for his efforts to save their family, and the couple loves each other. In the morning, the wife starts searching the internet for a cello and a good tutor, when cries come from downstairs. The angry Andy has come to confront his brother who fired him, which means he won't be able to pay child support or see his daughter. At this point, Patrick calls and reminds him that everyone is already waiting for him. Andy leaves, and Ev expresses her grievances since her husband had promised to pay for both the repairs and her desires. The preoccupied Phil promises to sort everything out. 3 years ago, Phil and Ev spend a vacation in the Caribbean. They are completely happy, and the woman suggests getting married right there. Phil even tries to give her a ring, but he gets scared of something and backs out of his intention. In 2022, Phil shows Ev the cello he has repurchased for her, which she had once sold, and promises that everything will be very good for them. Afterward, he checks on his brother, whom he got a job, and they are very pleased with his performance. Andy asks him to pass a gift to his daughter, because his wife spotted him drunken and hasn't allowed them to meet. Andy's wife doesn't believe in her ex-husband's potential for change, but Phil persuades her otherwise and gives the gift to his niece. Later, he brilliantly presents and Kiss signs a contract with them, provided that they find a good lawyer who will exclusively represent them. In the evening, Patrick informs Phil that he has made arrangements with a highly reputed lawyer and asks him to attend a meeting. It turns out to be Miranda Delano, which Phil receives with visible tension. The reason is that he outplayed her in court, and the woman hasn't forgotten that. Furthermore, it's evident that Miranda has a liking for Phil, who agrees to have her join their firm. In the morning, the man meets the new secretary hired by Patrick and finds him with the representative from Kiss, who approves of Miranda's invitation. She has come to provide them with the addresses of 2 property owners who refuse to sell and thus obstruct the scheduled construction. On the way, Phil tries to convince Patrick to reconsider Miranda, but he can't understand the reasons for this. The couple manages to persuade one of the stubborn property owners, while Evelyn begins taking her first lessons, which makes it difficult for her to fulfill her duties at the firm. Meanwhile, the second property owner sends lawyers and refuses to sell. In the evening, Ev comes home later than planned because she met with a friend and again refuses to discuss the appearance of a child. Meanwhile, Patrick rents a good apartment for the secretary within walking distance of the office, persuading the young woman that she is indispensable. Later, the lawyers meet with representatives of Kiss, who point out a mistake in the documents made by Ev. Patrick informs them that Miranda is on her way to their office at the moment. Phil rushes there but doesn't manage to prevent the meeting of the 2 women. Later, Phil points out Ev's mistake, which is why they had to seek a competent lawyer, since she won't be able to work soon. The woman refuses to talk, and Phil calls Plan B to prevent the hiring of Miranda, but it turns out his credit card is empty. He buys flowers and goes to his wife, who is upset that Miranda has re-entered their lives. It turns out that Ev received a message from Phil to Miranda by mistake, where he confessed his desire to be with her. Although her husband argued that there was nothing between them, she can't stand to hear the rival's name. She gave up her career to be with him, and Phil doesn't appreciate it, bringing Miranda into their firm. But the husband reminds her that she chose him over her career, and now he is the one fighting for their relationship. In the morning, he apologizes to his wife and shows her the ring, purchased even before their trip to the Caribbean. He talks about the cancellation of the offer to Miranda and then goes to the lawyer to inform her that she won't be able to work at their firm. His next destination is the home of the second property owner, where he discovers that their new secretary is the daughter of the stubborn man. After listening to her, he begins to lean towards the decision to sell the house. After that, Phil informs Patrick that he and Ev are going on vacation and the offer to Miranda is cancelled. He tells Evelyn the same thing, confessing that he was flattered by the attention of a famous lawyer. He asks for the child to still be a part of their plans, and Ev agrees, packing for the trip. They arrive at the same place where once upon a time, Philip was going to propose. Upon reaching the shore, he presents Ev with the ring. However, she recalls the feelings she experienced upon learning about Miranda and admits that she cheated on him. Phil throws the ring away and leaves. Returning home, Phil learns that the public is in an uproar over Kiss's intention to open the mine and accuses the lawyers of deception. Evelyn tries to talk to Phil, and he finally agrees to listen to her in exchange for the name of her lover. Ev reminds him of a client who was upset about his divorce and hit a woman on the way home. So, his lawyer, Terrence, showed interest in her. They had a brief fling, but it didn't last long. She asks her husband for forgiveness, but Phil is unforgiving, even though he was busy with Miranda at the time. The man remembers how the lawyer gave him her address, but he didn't go to her back then. Ev continues to remember how she asked for his help because she felt a lump in her chest and was very afraid of cancer. Her husband just brushed off her fears at the time, but Phil suddenly asks about the timing of her affair and concludes that the child inside her is not his, as they always used protection. At this time, Patrick ends his relationship with one of the Kiss leaders he got involved with for the contract. Phil has to search for his seemingly drunk brother and calm down their selfish mother, who reminds him of the day when Andy, his brother, stormed into her house, causing trouble. They accuse each other of mutual inattentiveness, and Phil ends up taking the blame again. Later, he conducts an interview with a candidate for the lawyer role, who proposes entirely unacceptable terms. After this, Phil fires Ev because it was her mistake that got them into this situation. A quarrel ensues, and the man admits that he shouldn't have bought the house with her. Patrick learns about this and reminds him that half the firm is his. But Phil doesn't want to hear anything and calls Plan B to prevent the purchase of the house. Soon, Patrick calls him, revealing that he had been keeping his family a secret from his lover, who saw them with the children today. This could cause problems with Kiss. On TV, reports about protests against the mine construction are broadcast, which Ev interrupts, reminding Phil of the day they didn't use protection. So, the child is definitely his. And right at that moment, the twins from Plan B ring the doorbell. Phil finds himself back on the day when they were inspecting the house, and he decided not to buy it. Later, Ev asks him to help examine her breast because she thinks there is a lump. He advises his wife to see a doctor and heads to court, where his opponent is Miranda. Phil counters all her objections and proposes to meet and discuss the terms. During the conversation, he receives a call from Andy, and Phil remembers that today, an unpleasant scene will take place at his brother's wife's house. He rushes there and prevents the scandal. He returns home late, and Evelyn, who has woken up, comforts him, sympathizing with his problems with his brother. In the morning, she initiates a conversation about the house, but Phil avoids answering because he constantly envisions Ev's infidelity. The next day, he tells his brother that Ev might be unfaithful to him, but Andy doesn't understand this perspective. Why worry about something that hasn't happened? Later, he wins the court case, and Miranda invites him to dinner, after which the two of them end up at her place. But suddenly, Phil sees Evelyn's face before him and realizes that he cannot betray the woman he loves. He goes back home, confesses his love to Ev, and in the morning, he suggests that they get back to making music, as that's what she had always wanted. He also agrees to buy the house they both liked. He easily wins all the cases that follow, amazes his wife with his foresight, and decides to quit working for Kiss. Andy returns to the family, and Phil becomes the lawyer for the man involved in the past accident with a woman. He comforts his client and offers to drive him home, as the man is deeply upset and has been drinking. They pause at the spot where the tragedy happened, and the woman calmly crosses the road. After dropping off his client at home, Phil drives to Terrence's law firm just to see him. In the evening, he buys flowers and arrives on time to conceive a child. The next day, Patrick informs that he secured a contract to represent the residents against Kiss, and Ev heads for an audition. Over time, the couple's relatives visit their new home and learn about Ev's pregnancy. They all raise a toast for the cellist's success, but Phil still can't shake off the visions of her being unfaithful to him. Evelyn starts rehearsals with the chamber orchestra, and her conductor pays close attention to her. Meanwhile, lawyers discover that Kiss is buying land around the designated mining areas. But why? Patrick learns about Kiss Company's data and starts monitoring it. One day, he follows a woman and stumbles upon a gathering of people who want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro to raise money for cancer research, where he meets the woman. As for Phil, he goes to meet Ev after her rehearsal and observes her warm relationship with the conductor, Alejandro, which once again triggers jealousy in him. Moreover, she refuses to leave because she needs to rehearse a lot. Patrick, on the other hand, continues to get to know the corporation's expert in chemistry, who reveals information about the mineral extracted by Kiss. It's not the mineral itself that's dangerous, but what surrounds it, which is why the business people are buying up the neighboring lands. This means that the people living nearby will undoubtedly suffer if mineral mining begins. At the same time, Ev spends more time with the orchestra, which, of course, bothers Phil. Nevertheless, he tries to control his jealousy. One day, he attends an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting to support Andy and hears him speak about his brother, who is a role model for him. Andy introduces his brother to the organizer of the meetings, and Phil brings up the issue of infidelity that never happened. Andy acknowledges that there is a problem. As for Phil, a new obsession develops. Now he envisions Ev with Alejandro. Patrick continues his relationship with the expert and gets to know her seriously ill partner, earning the woman's complete trust. Meanwhile, people from the surrounding area come to Phil, scared and refusing to sue Kiss, which makes him late for Evelyn's performance. This causes her anger and another argument. But the couple makes amends, and their relationship is restored until the moment when Ev has to leave for a tour. Phil notices that she doesn't look well, but she attributes it to tiredness. Later, Patrick announces that the expert revealed that her safety report was a fake, which means they have the corporation in their hands. He intends to threaten Kiss and demand a substantial sum from them. Phil reminds him that without the girl's testimony, the recording won't be considered evidence. With no place to go after work, and his wife not answering his calls, Phil remembers the meeting place and decides to go there to talk to the organizer. The man listens to his confessions about not trusting his wife and laments that, unfortunately, one cannot turn back time. He advises Phil to either accept the woman or let her go and move on. In the morning, he witnesses a commotion in Patrick's office. The expert has no intention of confirming her statements, which means the information gathered by the lawyer holds no weight. Then Patrick suggests intimidating Kiss, to which Phil recommends hiring their own expert and conducting analyses. Patrick takes it upon himself to go to the corporation and tells them that he knows everything and demands hush money. Meanwhile, Phil receives a call from Quebec in the middle of the night, informing him that Ev is in the hospital due to premature labor. He rushes there and learns that the situation was triggered by an infection. The woman is out of danger, but their baby girl is very weak and gets sent to a specialized clinic. At the same time, Patrick discovers a noose hanging on a swing set in his yard. Evelyn struggles with the aftermath, while Phil organizes her transfer to the same clinic where their daughter is. Patrick nearly hits a car in the parking lot. Meanwhile, the doctor informs Ev that her daughter is very weak and is unlikely to survive. The cause of this was a urinary tract infection in the mother, which triggered a kidney disease in the baby. Phil tries to ascertain the exact timing of when the illness started, but the doctor doesn't understand and refuses to answer. Later, all the relatives come to support Ev, and Patrick asks Phil to be closer to his sister. After returning home, Patrick finds a box with pictures of his family. This night, Ev confesses that she has felt unwell for a long time, but skipped the doctor's appointment due to her tour schedule. Phil asks the doctor for a prognosis, and she admits that, in all likelihood, Ev could have prevented what happened by coming in for an examination. Phil calls Plan B. 5 years ago, the couple discusses the possibility of having children, but Evelyn wants to ensure they have everything they need. Phil promises that when their children arrive, they will grow up in a big house with everything they need. In the present, Phil places an order and is informed that the agents will arrive tomorrow. In the meantime, he goes to the boxing gym, takes out a tiny girl, and promises that he will definitely save her. He makes the same promise to his wife, who is on the verge of despair. Meanwhile, Patrick receives instructions to go to a motel and check in under a false name. He complies, calls Phil, and tells him that he went to kiss, and now he's being threatened. He asks for help, but Phil doesn't want to assist someone who acted against his advice. The next day, Phil waits for the Plan B agents, but they are nowhere to be found. Evelyn asks him to come to her, but he can't leave the house. He waits and starts cutting some information on his arm. They arrive late in the evening, and Phil finds himself at the moment when his wife was getting ready for her tour. He immediately tells Ev that she can't go because she has a fever, but she refuses to listen. Phil refers to the vision and then says that he has already experienced this. He tries to stop her, but Evelyn falls down the stairs just when her friend enters the house. Thankfully, there are no injuries to Evelyn, but the mere fact that her husband allegedly pushed her causes a real shock. The women literally rush to the orchestra's van, not giving Phil a chance to explain. Then he gets into his car and rushes after them, listening to Patrick's message about the false kiss report. He asks his partner not to threaten the corporation and promises to handle everything, but realizing that he can't stop Evelyn, he turns onto another road, calls his mother, and asks her to inform Ev that he had an accident and was taken to a clinical hospital. The woman calls Ev, and she, along with her friend, rushes to the hospital where her doctor, whom Phil tracked down, is already waiting for her. She insists on a checkup while Phil buys a lottery ticket. Evelyn meets her husband with suspicion because he looks quite well for someone who was in an accident, but Patrick becomes the center of his attention, eager to find out how he learned about the fake reports. However, Phil asks to postpone all the questions because Evelyn is in danger. Then the doctor informs them that she has detected an infection, and this is a real miracle. Had they come later, things could have gone very badly. The expectant mother must adhere to bed rest. Phil has to come up with an explanation for noticing discharge on her underwear, thereby suspecting an illness and then having a dream in which their daughter was born prematurely and died because Ev didn't undergo an examination. Ev doesn't believe him, but Phil finds excuses for all her questions. The most important thing is that they are both fine. At this moment, the lottery results are shown on TV, and Phil rolls up his sleeve, concealing the numbers cut into his skin. Later, he wins a huge jackpot, but keeps it a secret from everyone. In this storyline, he goes to kiss himself, and, threatening to carry out an independent investigation, demands that they abandon the construction of the mine in the populated area. Later, Evelyn expresses her frustration at having to stay in bed for months, but Phil reminds her of her words about not being able to cope if something happens to the baby. Evelyn is surprised. She didn't say such things. Meanwhile, the lawyer persuades people not to give in to KISS and to preserve the environment for their children and grandchildren, although Patrick is in favor of taking the corporation's money and ending the resistance because he needs the money to pay off his mortgage. But Phil remains resolute and reminds them about conscience. 2 days later, he goes to pick up Evelyn, not realizing that he is being followed. He picks up his wife, who doesn't understand what has happened to her partner, who tries to control her every move. Evelyn is surprised to see a new car, and Phil almost hits Patrick's car in the parking lot. A letter with photos of his family is found at the door. He calls a specialist to install security systems in the house, which surprises Evelyn. He has to confess that KISS is threatening him. He tells Patrick the same thing. He then offers him money to leave the firm. The partner is utterly puzzled, and Phil gives an interview where he reveals everything about the deal with the corporation and the fake reports. A commotion ensues, and now it's pointless and even dangerous to threaten Phil. Evelyn misses him more and more, so Phil brings a stack of videotapes and books to the house and hires a housekeeper and a nurse for her. She doesn't understand where the money came from, and in the meantime, Phil buys a new house and buys out Patrick's share for a very good price. One day, he catches Evelyn at home with Alejandro and her friend, with whom she's rehearsing, and again, he experiences jealousy. Unable to stand it, he takes Evelyn to the new house and admits that he won $25 million. He shows her the house, especially proud of the children's room when Evelyn's water breaks. He takes her to the hospital, where Evelyn gives birth to a healthy girl. 7 years ago, Evelyn wakes up with a hangover in bed with a guy who hopes for a continuation of their relationship. But Evelyn has no intention of starting a relationship, and today she needs to be at a party celebrating the opening of her brother's law firm, where she meets Phil and eventually enters into a relationship. In the present, Phil joyfully takes care of the child and establishes a fund to help sick children to prevent sorrow and pain. However, his transformation into a politician leads to Evelyn's feeling of misunderstanding and even disapproval. Patrick also hopes for his return to the firm, although he acquired it entirely. And one day, Evelyn confesses that he is suffocating her with his care. He always knows what to do and makes her follow his advice. Then Phil tells her about the Plan B agency, which makes her laugh. Naturally, she doesn't believe his words and confesses that she, too, would like to move back in time, never abandon music, not live in the house, not have a child, and not be with him in the first place. Phil is shocked by her admission and suggests they go back to the past, right now. He dials a number, but Evelyn thinks he's crazy and leaves. At home, the woman packs her things and prepares her daughter, despite all her husband's promises to change. He is ready to give her everything, as long as she doesn't leave, but it's all in vain, and Evelyn goes to her parents' house. For the first time, Phil can't decide which period in time he needs to go to in order to fix this. He spends whole days at home, staring at the ceiling when Andy comes and tries to help his brother in any way possible. This ends in a drinking binge and the realization that no amount of money and effort can change the present. He starts to get heavily involved in the foundation's work, allocating money for the construction of a children's hospital, when Patrick suddenly shows up with Evelyn because Phil demanded full custody of their daughter. He warns that no one will be able to prove that Evelyn is a bad mother, but a friend of his wife saw him push her down the stairs. Phil offers Patrick $200,000, but for the first time in his life, Patrick is in no need of money, unable to comprehend how his friend reached this point. Evelyn shows up at rehearsals and tells Alejandro that her relationship with Phil is over. However, the woman does not prevent Phil from communicating with their daughter after he has given up full custody. The man goes on outings with the little girl and takes her on weekends. Gradually, his relationship with Evelyn and Patrick improves, although Phil does not rush to sign a divorce agreement. One day, the man goes to a pool where children's classes are taking place and he participates in them, while Evelyn watches from the sidelines, understanding that Phil loves their daughter very much. The woman dedicates herself entirely to her creativity and socializing with friends, even though she disagrees that these years were wasted. However, Charlotte falls ill somehow, and the couple goes to the hospital, where a doctor, seeing how they care for the girl, calls them an excellent team. On the way back, Phil confesses his love to his wife, but she doesn't want to hear it. They manage to be parents but not a couple. After these words, Phil freezes at the wheel, and in the next moment, a collision occurs. His consciousness flickers on and off as he sees doctors, then Patrick, then doctors again, and Andy. Last of all, Evelyn comes in, wishing him to die as soon as possible. But soon Phil regains consciousness and asks Andy to take him home. Andy complies with his request, even though his brother has sustained quite severe injuries. At home, he finds the Plan B number and places an order. Andy can't understand what's happening, but his brother simply asks him to wait. In the morning, the doorbell rings, and the twins appear at the doorstep of Evelyn. They drag her into the van, and the woman wakes up with a hangover, in bed with a guy who hopes for a continuation of their relationship. Evelyn can't understand how this was possible, and realizing she is in the past, she screams in horror. She bursts into her brother's party and throws a fit, accusing Phil of killing her daughter. Onlookers believe she has gone insane, and Phil even claims he is seeing her for the first time. Her friend believes she might have hit her head, but reminds her that it is time to fly to Prague, as she wanted. The woman packs up and starts a new life. 7 years later, she flies to Canada with Alejandro, whom she intends to marry and introduce to her parents. And at the same time, Phil meets his pregnant wife, Miranda, who had been meeting her ex-husband for business matters, which doesn't sit well with her current spouse. However, Miranda reminds him that she's here with him and has no intention of going anywhere. Besides, they're expecting a child. Phil apologizes because he's been trying hard not to control her every move. They go to a concert where Patrick and his family are also present, and he introduces Evelyn to his friend's family. Later, when they're alone, she confesses that she was very angry with him, but now she's grateful for what he did. She's happy in doing what she loves. It's at this point that Phil apologizes for both himself and Charlotte, indicating that everything that happened was not what it seemed. Many people dream of going back in time and changing something that ruined their lives, but does it always lead to a better outcome? Czech astrophysicist Jakob wakes up in his ship thousands of miles from Earth. His day starts with a call from the flight curator and close friend Peter. Today, the people of Earth want to communicate with the hero. The head of the Czech space program, Tuma, greets the brave pilot as he has been on a solo flight for 189 days already. The thing is, for 4 years, a mysterious cosmic phenomenon, which has been named Chopra's Cloud, has been observed from Earth. To study its origin and composition, Jakob was sent to Jupiter. In just a few days, he will be able to take samples, which may help unravel the mysteries of the universe. The captain is asked questions, and suddenly a girl sympathizes with him, as he is the loneliest person in the universe. But Jakob assures her that it is not so. Yes, he is 500 million kilometers away from Earth, but nearly half the distance has been covered and he will soon return home. Moreover, his beloved wife Lenka constantly supports him, with whom he is in direct contact through the latest quantum communication system, which is faster than the speed of light. So Jakob does not suffer from loneliness. TV takes a commercial break where a cheerful Jakob praises the products of a generous sponsor. But the astronaut immediately frowns, and it becomes clear that he is a tired man who has not slept for a long time. Meanwhile, on Earth, Lenka records a message to her husband, apologizing for leaving him because she is not needed by him. But the flight curator stops the file from being sent and passes it to Tuma. On the ship, Jakob repairs the toilet again, grumbling at Peter, but the latter is more concerned about the malfunctioning cameras. He also notices the astronaut's tired look and advises him to get some sleep. Jakob asks to contact Lenka because she somehow does not respond to his calls, and he promises to find out the reason. The man begins training when Tuma reviews his wife's message. The woman sincerely worries for the family and does not intend to pass this message to Jakob. Lenka is packing her things at this time and does not respond to her husband's messages. Distressed, Jakob drowns his sorrows in sweets and tries to sleep, watching the approaching Chopra's Cloud. At night, noises from the malfunctioning toilet keep him from sleeping. He gets up unrested and even more tired, and looking at himself in the mirror, suddenly notices strange movement under his skin and tentacles protrude from his mouth. Jakob is horrified, trying to pull something out of himself, and wakes up. He starts the day on the treadmill, then prepares to equip the apparatus for sample collection. Half of the ship's cameras are out of order, and no one understands why. The thought of Lenka, who still does not make contact, disturbs him. And one day Jakob suddenly hears an unfamiliar voice offering help, but Peter hears nothing of the sort. True, there is a chance that Jakob intercepted the transmission of the Korean mission, which started after the Czech one, but the language was not Korean at all. Later, the friend informs that Lenka went to her mother's, so she will contact her husband when she returns. Jakob calms down a bit and continues his work. He inspects the compartments and suddenly sees a huge hairy spider in one of them. He closes the doors to the compartment and contacts Peter. But precisely in this part of the station, the camera has long been broken and he can see nothing. Jakob opens the doors, but the spider has not gone anywhere. Moreover, it starts a conversation, stating that it did not intend to scare the human. Then the astronaut locks himself in the airlock and informs Peter that he wants to decontaminate the ship. He gets into a spacesuit, says the password that triggers the system, and the surrounding space is filled with disinfecting foam, the color of which reminds him of a summer morning in the field where he and Lenka walked. But then the cleaning is over and Jakob emerges from the airlock. However, the spider hasn't gone anywhere. It informs him that the strange bath arranged for it by the human did not harm it and suggests removing the spacesuit. It is not dangerous. Jakob reaches out to it, but the spider dodges. Such is not the custom in its tribe, so it's better for the human not to do this. It is an explorer too who accidentally found Earth. It studied life on the planet for 3,158 years and even learned Earth's languages, but never understood the essence of the human soul. And when it met Jakob, it felt his loneliness and came here. Unable to accept what was happening, the astronaut hides in the sleeping compartment, but he immediately starts to vividly see and hear his wife. Jakob moves to the station's room, where Lenka appears before him again. It turns out the spider is broadcasting the human's memories because it is very interested in these strange feelings. And it wants to help him overcome emotional difficulties since his companion is leaving. Jakob tries to refuse the help, but the spider does not believe him. Meanwhile, on Earth, Lenka arrives at her mother's because she is pregnant and cannot be alone. Nearby is a boarding house where pregnant women live together, and she decides to stay there for a while. The mother does not understand her, as one cannot leave her husband right now. At the station, the spider asks the astronaut to give it some of his food, and he treats it to nut paste, the taste of which reminds it of its lost home. Its planet was destroyed by an enemy attack, and it fled and wandered through space for a long time. At this time on Earth, Tuma goes to Lenka. The woman is convinced that the wife cannot leave her husband right now. After all, she knew he was a very peculiar person. These qualities help him stay alone for many days, but Lenka is pregnant and suffers from loneliness. The spider tells the astronaut that Chopra's cloud consists of particles that contain wisdom. It cannot say how old it is, but everything has a beginning and an end, even the universe. The spider shows Jakob his first date with Lenka when she suggested they always follow each other, and he agreed. And he does not understand why make promises that you cannot keep, but Jakob has no answer. Later, he asks the spider to save some nut paste, and it reluctantly gives back the can. At this time on Earth, Lenka confesses to her mother that, although it is hard to raise a child alone, she is ready for it. And she will tell her daughter that she loved her father very much at first, but was mistaken. And at the station, Jakob suddenly wonders about the spider's name and suggests naming the creature Hanus. His father told him about a master who lived in ancient times, who created astronomical clocks, for which the king ordered him to be blinded. The spider agrees to accept this name. Later, the astronaut plays music from the opera Mermaid and explains what it is. The spider immediately demonstrates his date with his wife when she appeared before him in a Naiad costume, but the man does not want to remember this. At night, Jakob again has nightmares, this time related to his father, who was a communist and died because of his beliefs. But the spider comforts its friend. There is no need to worry about the past, as the universe is as it should be. Later, Hannes watches in surprise as Jakob exercises, and Jakob explains that humans must do this in space, otherwise their limbs could fail. Hanus doesn't understand why leave the home planet then. At this time, Tuma visits Lenka. The woman tries to reach out to the wife's feelings, but she does not want to return to the past. Then the head says she will not pass her message, and the whole point of the silence surrounding their talks is that inside they are together. Meanwhile, there are only 45 hours left to reach the cloud. And then Lenka's voice spreads through the station. Jakob rushes to the transmitter and sees his wife's face on the screen. They talk about the past and the future when he sees a glowing particle in front of him, which Hannes calls the beginning. Jakob tries to catch it in a jar, but the particle freely passes through all surfaces. Suddenly, the ship loses all communication, and then Chopra's particles start swirling everywhere. Hannes calms the human. The beginning will not harm him, so there is no need to fear. It is a regular repository that cannot be described in human language. And then it asks why the arrival of a child so upsets Lenka. Because her feelings smell of fear. Jakob explains that they lost their first child, and he was not there then, nor now. For what? The spider shows Jakob their conversation when he promised to be there, but he lied to his wife, and she stopped believing him. Later, Jakob finally gets through to Peter on the quantum phone, but Hannes again turns on the man's memories, where he and his wife discuss his journey. He was so confident that he didn't even try to understand his wife. The spider realized that Jakob is selfish, and he is to blame for his loneliness. So it lost interest in him and wants to leave. This causes a panic attack in the astronaut, who no longer wants to be alone. Jakob tries to grab the spider, but it itself presses the man's body to the bulkhead and reminds him that it preferred to communicate without touching. The spider lets the human go and flies to the other end of the station. Jakob desperately follows it, promising to change, and again sees Lenka in the guise of a naiad. He floats in zero gravity, remembering his wife and crying from the sense of realizing the loss. Then he calls Peter and asks him to visit the woman. The friend goes to the boarding house and hands her the quantum phone. Jakob talks about how he loves her and asks for forgiveness for his selfishness. Now he doesn't understand why he neglected the most precious. He wasted his life on nonsense and is not worthy of her. Immediately after the conversation, he hears Hannes' voice again, asking him to rest because he has atoned for his guilt. Jakob asks not to leave him, and the spider admits that it too fears loneliness. But suddenly the man notices that the spider is not feeling well, and it admits that although it escaped from the enemy, it was already too late. They had taken over his body, and suddenly it hugs the astronaut. For the first time in a long time, Jakob falls asleep deeply, and the spider has to wake him up because a great discovery awaits him. It even brings him a tube of hot coffee to bed, after which the astronaut makes the final preparations. He contacts the Czech Space Authority and reports that his mission is dedicated to all the people of Earth, but especially to Lenka. Afterward, he reduces speed and begins collecting samples using special equipment. But then the spider becomes very ill. Jakub abandons his task and tries to help his friend. The equipment gives an error, and Earth commands to cancel the sample collection. But Jakub hears nothing because he sees Hanus in open space. The ship's systems fail one after another, and the control center orders to end the mission and return. But Jakub puts on a spacesuit, takes a bomb, and goes outside. Peter can't understand what's happening and pleads with his friend to return to the ship. However, using the explosion to catch up with the spider, Jakub holds it. Hanus thanks him, but it's all in vain. Soon the enemies will consume him, and Jakub, looking at the surrounding space, remembers the day he almost drowned. Then his father saved him, and now he forgives all his father's sins, and forgives himself. Hanus pulls him to the center of the cloud, where everything is gathered, the beginning and the end, the fluctuation of all times, his past and future, him, his Lenka, and his father. Every promise and punishment, everything is unchangeable and impermanent, but such is the truth of nature. The universe is as it should be. Before the man, Lenka appears again, and Jakub admits that their meeting is a miracle. Just like the meeting with the spider. Jakub hands his friend a can of nut paste he saved for him. The latter thanks him and asks to listen to the silence, after which it disintegrates into millions of particles, consumed by worm-like creatures that destroyed his race. And Lenka on Earth suddenly sees a glowing purple particle in the grass. Night turns into day. Jakub in a spacesuit wades through a transparent stream, above which, on a log, sits Lenka in a mermaid costume asking him to kiss her. Her face becomes the last thing he sees, at least for a moment, because at that time, he sees the lights of a South Korean ship which saves Jakub. Later, he calls his wife Lenka, apologizes, and confesses that if he had known everything earlier, he would never have left, and she would kiss him once more. A fantastic, yet lifelike film. A work-absorbed astronaut had to be millions of kilometers away from his wife and hear a sermon from an extraterrestrial being to understand that family is the most important thing in his life, and one can only hope that he will manage to regain his sense of purpose. Krefeld, 1984. One night, a father awakens his 6-year-old son Mark because they need to flee their now dangerous home. While the man hurries the older son, Thomas, Mark sees a frog statuette that stood on the shelf come to life. The father and sons drive into the night. Suddenly, the boy's mother Petra appears, begging the father not to take the sons as no one is pursuing him. He drives around her and races to the cemetery. 10 years pass. Mark works at the Living Sound store he opened with his brother and attends school, where he has a bad reputation as his brother was once expelled for aggressive behavior. Besides the boys, a lame kid named Memo works in the store, whom Thomas values for his loyalty. On his younger brother's birthday, Thomas gives him the Chronicle, an ancient book passed down in their family from generation to generation, telling of a parallel world called the Black Tower, full of terrifying creatures serving the Griffin, who wants to subjugate the world of humans. Only the Zimmerman family men can stand against the Griffon and save everyone from his invasion. Mark begins reading, considering it all fantasy, but the descriptions are too realistic, and the map looks genuine. Disturbed by the bloodthirsty drawings, Mark suddenly finds himself in unknown terrain at the base of a huge tower, and immediately a terrible horned creature confronts him. Mark runs and falls into a pit, and as the monster swings an axe at him, the boy screams in fear and finds himself back in his bed. The next day, Mark meets a new student at school, Rebecca, who classmates immediately inform about Mark's family troubles. His brother Thomas was in an asylum for hitting a teacher, and Mark attends psychotherapy sessions, trying to forget the events of one terrible night. But the girl isn't scared off, happily accepting Mark's invitation to the rooftop of the store, which is set up as a picnic area. In the evening, Mark finds Thomas at home, which is rare. Everything goes well until Petra starts a conversation about the asylum she put him in. Then Thomas invites his brother to look at evidence and drives him to the cemetery. They climb to the attic of the church where their ancestors had equipped a shelter. Thomas shows the father's belongings, missing a plumb bob. Here, Mark cuts his finger. His blood hits an inconspicuous peg, and a secret compartment in the floor opens, where the brothers find the tool the Zimmermans can use to kill the griffin. But the moment Mark takes it in his hands, stone statues at the cemetery come to life, one appearing on the roof, blocking the brothers' way down. Nonetheless, they descend, but a stone devil jumps right in front of their car. A stone angel intervenes to protect the boys, and while the two statues fight, the brothers hide in the church. Waiting out the battle, Mark falls asleep, and in the morning, doesn't find Thomas next to him, but the hood of his car is covered in stone debris. Mark thanks the angel for help and drives to look for his brother. Opening the Chronicle, he hears voices advising to look for Thomas in the Black Tower. Mark goes to Dr. Peters, and it turns out that Becky is the daughter of his psychotherapist. Mark drives to the store, but his brother isn't there either. The boy opens the Chronicles and finds information about a portal located in the church. But then he gets scared by an unknown insect and ends up in a dense forest. Meanwhile, Memo, seeing that the brothers aren't in the store, calls their mother Petra, who immediately rushes to the police and reports the children missing. Mark finds Thomas, who rejoices that his brother has finally seen the truth, but learning that he simply teleported here, he concludes that his brother is a wanderer between worlds. In the morning, Thomas wakes his brother because nearby appear slave hunters. The boys run, but Thomas is wounded and captured, while Mark teleports to the store, terrifying Becky and Memo. Friends ask him to tell them everything, and he finally agrees. Meanwhile, in the Black Tower, one of the horned creatures reports to the master that they caught the Wanderer's brother, and he concludes that it's time for the return. Friends predictably don't believe Mark, and he leads them to the church, but there's no attic above. Becky considers this a cruel joke, as it was dangerous for Memo with his leg to climb up there. Mark gets angry, and the girl, offended, leaves. In rage, Mark hits the stone base of the statue, and these blows resonate in the caves of the Black Tower. At night, Mark goes to Memo because he needs help searching for his brother, and although he considers the boy crazy, he goes with him to the portal in the church. The boys follow the instructions from the book and find a door with signs in the basement. Mark performs the necessary manipulations, and the door opens. Astonished, Memo goes there and immediately notices that his vision has become normal, and his leg no longer hurts. And while the boy rejoices, the passage closes. Memo asks to remember how Mark returned home last time, and he shows how he closed his eyes, thought, and disappears, leaving Memo alone in a strange world. Memo didn't appreciate such a joke. Opening his eyes, Mark is horrified and tries to return for Memo, but it doesn't work. Then Petra enters, sees the Chronicles, locks her son in the room, and he falls into a rage, causing the walls of the Black Tower to crumble. Petra calls the doctor and he asks to release the son. Mark rushes to the church but only finds a note on a piece of wood that Memo is nearby. The boy returns to the store and, taking the necessary items, goes to Becky, where he tells her that Memo stayed in the Black Tower. He leaves her the Chronicles and a note asking her to take the book to Petra if they don't return. He goes to the world of the Black Tower and tries to find a friend, while Becky reads the Chronicles and ponders the boy's mental health. Mark emerges from the forest and, setting up a sound system on a cliff, plays Memo's favorite music. Meanwhile, the slave hunters capture a village where they seek a man with a loud voice. One of the boys, wishing to save his family, volunteers to become one, and they take him away, while a group of horned creatures goes to the strange sounds in the hills. At the same time, Becky shares Mark's secret with classmates and suggests conducting an experiment to animate a plant from the book. The volunteer is brought to the cave and seated in a stone chair. Now the griffin, wanting to speak, inserts its claw into the boy's back, and he voices its thoughts. While Mark is discovered by horned creatures, the boy runs from them when an unfamiliar man, completely wrapped in rags, covers the boy with smelly fish and hides him in a forest den. Meanwhile, Becky performs the ritual, dripping water on the flower, but young people vainly wait for some manifestations of magic. The flower remains dry. Becky suggests a last attempt at the portal, not noticing how a classmate puts the flower in a glass of water. At the same time, the horned creatures leave, and the stranger helping Mark removes the rag from his face, revealing himself to be Memo. But he's been in this world for 2 weeks, not 2 days. Then the boys see a caravan of slaves, and in one of them, they recognize Thomas. But while they can't help him, they themselves are noticed. The boys run from the pursuers and end up on a high cliff with no way out. On Earth, Mark's classmates come to the church and perform everything prescribed, but the door doesn't open. Then Mark grabs Memo, jumps off the cliff, and teleports to his room. Petra hears a noise in her son's room, runs there, and sees Mark and Memo, who now needs glasses again. Mark calls Becky and asks her to bring the Chronicles, while a flower blooms on her desk, from which something terrible emerges. The next day, the boys begin developing a plan to save Thomas, especially since Memo now knows a lot about the world of the Black Tower. He built a hut on the shore of a lake where the caravans of slaves stop, following which one can find the place of the boys' confinement. Meanwhile, the Griffin is reported that the Wanderer between worlds has escaped, and it destroys its close. And Becky, waking up, finds a blooming flower, miraculously avoiding contact with the creature, and gives the Chronicles to her father because she now considers Mark sick. In school, she tells the boy about this, and he experiences another fit of rage. Becky's father, having read the Chronicles, goes to Petra and admits that he underestimated her son's illness. The woman decides to hospitalize Mark despite the doctor's protests. Later, the woman detains her son near the house when an ambulance arrives, and paramedics grab the boy, but he resists and runs across the roof to the church, where Memo has long been waiting, but the paramedics come there too. The boys fend them off when suddenly a hooded man comes and scatters the medics, beating one to death. The boys run to the door, while Petra waiting outside sees a bloodied Mark coming out of the church. At that time, Memo leads his friend to his hut by the lake. Meanwhile, the father informs Becky about Mark's deed and forbids her from leaving the house. He himself goes to the crime scene and confirms Mark's capacity for crime. Becky enters her room, turns on music, and lies down on the floor. At the same time, a downpour suddenly starts in the Black Tower, and the alarmed Memo shows the scorpions hatching from the flowers upon contact with water. The boys run away. On Earth, Becky is attacked by a similar scorpion that enters her mouth. She manages to pull it out with tongs and destroy it by sprinkling salt. The boys also manage to escape by climbing onto a rock. Morning comes, the scorpions dry out right before their eyes, and Becky rushes to look for the Chronicles because she now believes the boy. She takes the book and hurries to Petra. At the same time, the boys reach a lake in the mountains. On Earth, Becky's father comes home, takes off his bloodied clothes and burns them in the yard because it was he who was in Mark's guise in the church and killed the medic. Meanwhile, a faceless wizard arrives at the Griffin, reporting that he did everything to prevent the boy from returning to the human world. And Mark, at this time, admires Memo's cabin and is surprised by the changes in his friend. From the cabin, one can monitor the paths, and the caravan will not pass by unnoticed. But just in case, the boys set up signal cans. Becky comes to Petra, where a detective arrives, who also notes the oddity of what is happening. The girl tells everything she managed to find out about the Zimmerman family, and only then notices that she forgot her backpack with the Chronicle in the classmate's car. Mark and Memo spend the evening by the fire, developing a plan. Mark can go to the mines, find Thomas, and teleport home with him. Memo is ready to walk to the portal that Mark will open, but the boy needs to train in teleportation. At this time, the wizard reports the plans of the boys who stopped at the lake. The Griffin orders their capture and reminds that he does not need complications in the human world yet. In the morning, Mark wakes up feeling someone's presence, and going to the shore, hears the screams of a fish, which Memo catches, and guts. Mark remembers how and where he teleported, and begins training. At the same time, a messenger from the Black Tower comes to Dr. Peters's house, telling about Mark's appearance. The doctor is proud of himself because it was he who prepared the boy, invoking the necessary rage in him and cutting off his way to the world of people. After seeing off the guest, the doctor goes to Becky's room and discovers that she has disappeared. He gathers dust in her room and, tasting it, learns about everything she did during the day. Then he goes to a youth party where the girl went to get her backpack back. Meanwhile, Memo expresses the thought that fear is not necessary for teleportation, and Mark remembers the kiss with Becky and teleports to the town. He immediately returns, but it turns out that he was gone for 2 days. The boy finds out that strong emotion and a vision of the place to which one must move are needed for teleportation. At this time, Becky finds her water-soaked backpack in the kitchen, and opening the book, sees a bloomed flower. The girl realizes the threat looming over those present, takes a pack of salt, and goes to track down the monster. In the other world, Mark again hears someone's footsteps and sees his father, who accuses him of his own death. Memo brings him to his senses, but Mark is sure that someone is getting into his head. Meanwhile, Dr. Peters comes to the party when one of the girls is attacked by the monster. Becky rushes for help when her father stops her and, using hypnosis, orders her to leave. Petra and the detective sitting in the hall suddenly see young people flying out of the crowd, then screams are heard, and everyone runs away. And in the middle of the hall remains an incomprehensible creature, resembling a many-legged scorpion. The detective pulls out a gun, but the monster attacks him, knocking the weapon out. And then Petra picks up the pistol and saves the detective. Then the doctor enters the hall and the killed millipede turns into a bear. In the morning, Mark wakes up again from the scream of the fish and, in irritation, argues with Memo. But his box of nails, which he uses to remove anger, turns out to be empty. He runs out to the shore, where Memo teases him and throws the nails into the lake. Then he reminds him of his father, saying that he is to blame for his death. In a rage, Mark hits Memo, thereby collapsing the walls of the Black Tower. The Griffin sends hunters after him. Meanwhile, Memo collects firewood and, returning to the lake, sees Mark hitting another Memo. He touches the body and it suddenly scatters, but the traces in the sand betray the direction of his run. Memo throws a stick and stuns the faceless wizard who disguised himself as Memo. The boys tie him to a cot, and he tries to deceive the guys, alternately taking the forms of their fathers. Only under the threat of fire does the wizard admit that he is Mamit, a creature capable of recreating thought and showing what people want to see. He did everything at the behest of the Griffin because he feeds on Mark's hatred. At that moment, the signal of the caravan's arrival sounds. And in the town they investigate an accident, although no one can understand how the circus bear got out of the cage. The detective asks Petra for a conversation and tells her that after her husband's self-immolation, they did not find a trace of his body. He was taking antidepressants, thanks to which he was able to see the true face of the prosecutor. And it was not human. The case was slowed down, and today they both saw a monster, not a bear. So, they need to look for the chronicles. At the same time, the doctor brings Becky to her senses and she remembers the story about the Mammoths who served the Griffin, to which her father reacts very aggressively, which makes the girl suspicious. The doctor locks her up. Mark and Memo follow the trail of the Horned squad to the mine, where people work. The commander of the Horned reports to the mine overseer about the failure of their mission and receives an order to process the tunnels with tar mud. Mark, to find Thomas, turns on the music system. The brother raises his hand, but the Horned ones immediately take him into the mine. Mark suggests waiting for darkness. At night the boys say goodbye, and Mark teleports while Memo distracts the guard. The boy finds his brother, but it turns out that the tar prevents teleportation. Thomas admits that he was used as bait. They even left him a plumb line. This means that the Griffin is ready to attack the human world, using Mark's power. At the same time, Memo runs to the portal, leading away the Horned squad, while the brothers argue about who will fight the Griffin. Mark shows his superiority by breaking through the cave wall with a plumb line. The brothers run away, and Memo falls into an ambush and loses fingers on his hand. Mark and Thomas catch up with the squad, and, having killed one of the Horned ones, find the injured Memo. Learning about the escape of the Wanderer, the Griffin emerges from his hiding place and flies in the footsteps of the people who at that time are driving to the portal in a captured cart. But at the very door, Thomas suddenly demands that Mark give him the plumb line. He refuses, and Thomas forcibly takes it, and then the Griffin appears above them. At this time, the detective and Petra take Becky out of the house, ignoring her father's protests. Mark comes to his senses and hears Thomas's voice from the mist, picks up the plumb line he threw, and realizes that his brother was captured by the Griffin. At that time, Petra, the detective, and Becky are trying to open the portal. And the Griffin calls Mark to battle, fueling his hatred. But the boy suddenly remembers his father's advice, calms down, and refuses to fight while Petra opens the portal. Becky manages to pick up Memo when Mark sees the enraged Griffin and wounds him with a plumb line, forcing him to drop Thomas. The boys drag him into the passage and close the door in the monster's face. Meanwhile, a Mamit in the guise of Dr. Peters kills another Mamit who will now work on Earth instead of him. It turns out that Dr. Peters is a Mamit in human form, and in the church, he killed the medic while in the guise of Mark so that the police would look for the boy and he could not return to the world of people. Sometime later, Petra comes to her sons in the hospital and asks for forgiveness for mistrust, but now she has seen everything herself and, together with the detective, is ready to support them. Mark thanks Memo for everything, goes to Becky, and, having kissed her, teleports her to the lakeshore, while new horned ones are born from stones in the cave. An entertaining adventure series, quite decently filmed by German cinematographers. And judging by the finale, there will be a second season too.